You have been carrying a quiet wound for too long, the part of you that thinks it is not enough. The part that keeps asking why you were not chosen, why you were not loved better, why you are still behind, why praise fades so quickly, but criticism stays like a scar. And maybe nobody sees it because you smile, you work, you keep going. But deep inside, there is a tired voice, still trying to prove that you deserve to exist. Buddhist wisdom teaches that this pain is not who you are. It is something the mind learned through fear, attachment, comparison, and old hurt. And tonight, these lessons will help you sit beside that wounded part of yourself without judging it, without fighting it, without trying to become someone else. Slowly, the shame will soften, the need for approval will loosen, the old belief that love must be earned will begin to break, and something calmer will rise inside you. This is not just another lesson on self-worth. This is a gentle return to the truth that you were never incomplete. You were only taught to forget your wholeness. Are you ready? Let's begin. For most people, the deepest pain is not rejection from the world. It is rejection from themselves. It is the quiet war that happens inside the mind every single day. The endless pressure to be better, stronger, smarter, more lovable, more successful. The feeling that no matter how hard you try, some part of you still whispers, "You are not enough." And the frightening part is that many people no longer even notice they are doing it. Self-rejection becomes normal. Criticizing yourself becomes normal. Living in silent disappointment with who you are becomes normal. But Buddhism teaches that a mind at war with itself can never truly know peace. So before we go deeper into healing, we first have to look directly at the hidden violence most people carry inside themselves without realizing it. There is a form of suffering that leaves no bruise, no scar, no visible wound, yet it exhausts millions of people every single day. It is the suffering of constantly fighting yourself. The suffering of waking up every morning with the feeling that who you are right now is unacceptable. The suffering of carrying an invisible voice inside your head that never fully approves of you. Some people experience this voice loudly. Others experience it quietly, but almost everyone carries it in some form. It speaks after mistakes. It speaks after rejection. It speaks while scrolling through social media. It speaks while lying awake at night replaying old memories. Sometimes it even speaks during moments that should feel happy. You achieve something important, and instead of peace, the mind immediately searches for what is still missing. This is the hidden violence of self-rejection. And what makes it so dangerous is that society often rewards it. People praise harsh self-discipline without realizing it sometimes comes from self-hatred. They praise endless productivity without noticing the fear underneath it. They praise perfectionism while ignoring the emotional exhaustion behind the smile. Many people spend their entire lives believing that self-criticism is the same thing as self-improvement. But Buddhism teaches something very different. The Buddha understood that hatred cannot heal hatred, even when the hatred is directed toward yourself. A person who constantly attacks themselves internally may still appear successful externally, but inside they live in tension. Their nervous system never fully rests. Their mind becomes a courtroom where they are both the accused and the judge at the same time. And eventually, this creates deep suffering. One of the saddest things about self-rejection is that it often begins very early in life. A child is criticized too much, compared too often, ignored emotionally, loved only when performing well. Slowly, the child begins to believe, "Something about me is wrong." That belief may never be spoken aloud, but it settles deep into the nervous system. Then the child grows older. Now they become an adult who overthinks every interaction. An adult who feels guilty for resting. An adult who cannot handle failure because failure feels like proof of worthlessness. An adult who constantly tries to earn love, approval, or validation because deep down they still feel emotionally unsafe. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from attachment, but attachment is not only attachment to people or possessions. Sometimes the strongest attachment is attachment to an identity built from pain. I am not good enough. I must prove myself. I must become someone better before I deserve peace. These thoughts become part of identity itself. And because identity feels personal, the mind protects these beliefs even when they create suffering. This is why some people resist self-compassion. Compassion feels dangerous to a person who survived through self-criticism. Rest feels dangerous to a person whose worth was tied to productivity. Kindness toward themselves feels uncomfortable because they were taught that pressure is the only thing that keeps them valuable. But pressure is not peace. Fear is not growth. Self-hatred is not transformation. A flower does not bloom because someone screams at it every day. Human beings are not different. One of the deepest Buddhist teachings is the understanding that thoughts are not the self. Most people never question the voice inside their mind. They hear a cruel thought and immediately believe it. You are weak. You are behind. You ruined everything. You are embarrassing. You will never change. But Buddhism asks a powerful question. Who is the one noticing the thought? This changes everything, because the moment you notice the thought, instead of automatically becoming the thought, a small space appears. In that space, awareness begins. And awareness is where healing starts. The Buddha taught that the mind is constantly creating stories, judgments, fears, comparisons, and identities, but awareness itself is untouched by these storms. The sky is not damaged by the clouds moving through it. You are not every cruel sentence your mind repeats. You are not every fear. You are not every painful memory. You are the awareness beneath them. But many people never experience this because they are trapped in constant internal conflict. Their mind never stops evaluating itself. Every mistake becomes evidence. Every rejection becomes confirmation. Every flaw becomes another reason to withhold love from themselves. And over time, the body begins carrying this war too. The shoulders tighten, the stomach feels heavy, the chest feels restless, sleep becomes difficult. Even moments of silence feel uncomfortable because silence allows the hidden self-hatred to become louder. Some people stay constantly busy because busyness distracts them from their own inner violence. Others become addicted to achievement because achievement briefly silences feelings of inadequacy. Others seek relationships not from love, but from emotional escape. They hope another person will finally convince them they are worthy. But no external source can permanently heal internal rejection. This is why validation feels temporary. Someone praises you, and it feels good for a moment. Then the old insecurity returns. Someone loves you deeply, but eventually fear whispers, "What if they leave?" You achieve success, but the mind quickly moves the finish line again. This is because the wound was never truly about achievement, love, or approval. The wound was the belief that your worth depended on them in the first place. Buddhism teaches that suffering grows whenever the mind becomes attached to conditions. I will be enough when becomes a prison with no ending. I will be enough when I succeed, when I lose weight, when I become richer, when I heal completely, when everyone accepts me. But life keeps changing. Conditions keep changing, the mind keeps moving the target, and so peace never arrives. One of the most painful forms of self-rejection is comparing your inner world to other people's outer appearance. You see someone smiling and assume they are fulfilled. You see someone successful and assume they feel worthy. But many people who look confident externally are internally terrified of being exposed as inadequate. Some of the most exhausted people in the world are high achievers, secretly trying to outrun shame. The Buddha saw clearly that chasing identity through external things creates endless suffering because the ego can never feel permanently secure. Even when it wins, it becomes afraid of losing. Even when it succeeds, it becomes afraid of failure. The ego survives through comparison. Awareness survives through acceptance. This does not mean Buddhism teaches laziness or passivity. It does not mean you stop growing. It means your growth no longer comes from hatred toward yourself. A peaceful mind can still improve. A compassionate person can still evolve. But now the energy is different. You no longer grow because you believe you are worthless. You grow because you care about yourself. That changes everything. Many people have never experienced true self-compassion. They think compassion means weakness, but Buddhist compassion is incredibly powerful because it allows healing without violence. Think about how gently you speak to someone you truly love when they are hurting. You do not scream at them for making mistakes. You do not tell them they are hopeless because they failed once. You do not demand perfection before offering care. Yet many people speak to themselves with a cruelty they would never direct toward another human being. And after years of doing this, they wonder why they feel emotionally exhausted. The mind becomes whatever it repeatedly practices. A mind trained in self-attack begins expecting suffering everywhere. Even joy feels unsafe because the person unconsciously waits for disappointment. This is why some people sabotage happiness. Peace feels unfamiliar. Calmness feels suspicious. They learned early in life that safety could disappear quickly, so the nervous system stays alert even during good moments. Buddhism teaches that awareness allows us to interrupt these unconscious patterns, not by force, not through shame, but through observation. You begin noticing how often the mind attacks itself. You notice how quickly you dismiss your own efforts. You notice how difficult it feels to simply rest without guilt. You notice how deeply you crave approval. And slowly, instead of judging these patterns, you begin understanding them. That understanding matters, because people heal differently when they stop viewing themselves as broken enemies and start viewing themselves as wounded human beings. There is a major difference between saying, "What is wrong with me?" and asking, "What happened to me that created this suffering?" One question creates shame, the other creates compassion. Buddhism never teaches that humans are worthless. It teaches that suffering grows when the mind becomes trapped in illusion, attachment, fear, and ignorance. Self-rejection is one of those illusions. The tragedy is that many people spend years rejecting parts of themselves that simply needed understanding. Their sadness needed understanding. Their fear needed understanding. Their anger needed understanding. Their insecurity needed understanding. But instead, they attacked themselves for having emotions at all. And so the suffering deepened. Healing begins the moment you stop treating your pain like evidence that you are defective. Pain is part of being human. Fear is part of being human. Confusion is part of being human. The Buddhist path is not about becoming emotionally perfect. It is about learning how to stop creating additional suffering on top of the pain that already exists. This is why awareness matters so much. When sadness appears, the mind usually says, "I should not feel this." When fear appears, the mind says, "Something is wrong with me." When insecurity appears, the mind says, "I am weak." But awareness simply notices the experience without adding violence to it. This changes the relationship with suffering itself. Instead of drowning inside emotions, you begin sitting beside them. Instead of becoming shame, you begin observing shame. Instead of becoming fear, you begin witnessing fear. That small shift creates enormous freedom. Because the truth is that most people are not destroyed by pain itself. They are destroyed by their resistance to pain, their shame about pain, and the endless self-hatred that follows pain. A person can survive failure. A person can survive heartbreak. A person can survive rejection, but constantly abandoning yourself internally creates a loneliness deeper than any external loss. This is why self-compassion is not selfish. It is necessary, not the shallow kind sold online where people pretend everything is positive. Real compassion is honest. Real compassion says, yes, this hurts. Yes, I am struggling. Yes, I feel afraid. But I do not need to become my own enemy because of it. That is strength. And strangely, when people stop attacking themselves constantly, they often become healthier emotionally. The nervous system relaxes, the mind becomes clearer, decisions improve, relationships improve because they are no longer built entirely around validation and fear. Inner peace grows slowly, not through force, not through perfection, but through ending the war against yourself, one moment at a time. The Buddha once compared the human mind to muddy water. If the water is constantly disturbed, it cannot become clear. But when left still, clarity naturally returns. Most people never allow their inner world to become still. They remain trapped in endless mental conflict, endless proving, endless comparison, endless self-correction. And because of that, they never discover something important. Underneath the fear, underneath the shame, underneath the self-rejection, there is already a quiet awareness untouched by all of it. A part of you that was never broken, a part of you that does not need to earn existence, a part of you that has been waiting patiently beneath the noise of self-hatred this entire time. And maybe that is where healing truly begins. Not when you finally become perfect, not when everybody approves of you, not when you achieve enough, but when you stop turning your own mind into a battlefield, when you stop demanding that your humanity disappear before you deserve compassion, when you finally sit with yourself gently enough to hear the pain underneath the criticism. Because many times the voice saying you are not enough is actually a frightened part of you asking for love in the only way it learned how. And the moment you begin seeing that clearly, the violence starts to soften. And once the violence of self-rejection begins to soften, another hidden pattern becomes easier to see. The mind does not only reject who you are, it also creates a shining version of who it thinks you should be, then punishes you every day for not becoming that person fast enough. This is where a deeper dissatisfaction begins, because you are no longer living with your real self. You are living under the shadow of an impossible self. There is a quiet kind of sadness that comes from chasing a person you can never actually become, not because you are weak, not because you lack discipline, but because the ideal you inside your mind is not a real human being. It is a moving target built from fear, comparison, memory, shame, fantasy, and desire. It looks perfect from a distance, but the closer you get, the further it moves. The mind says, when I become calmer, richer, wiser, more loved, more attractive, more successful, more healed, then I will finally rest. But notice the trap. The mind never says, you may rest now. It always places peace somewhere ahead of you. Peace becomes a future reward, not a present possibility. And because the future never fully arrives, the heart keeps starving. This is one of the reasons many people feel tired even when nothing terrible is happening. They are not only dealing with life, they are also carrying the pressure of an invisible self they believe they must become. Every ordinary day feels like evidence that they are failing. Every delay feels like personal weakness. Every mistake feels like proof that the ideal version is slipping away again. Buddhist wisdom looks at this suffering with great clarity. It teaches that dissatisfaction is not created only by what is missing in life. It is created by craving, by clinging, by the mind's refusal to meet this moment as it is. The mind creates an image, attaches happiness to that image, then suffers because reality does not obey the image. You may be doing your best, but the mind says, not enough. You may be healing slowly, but the mind says, too slow. You may have survived things that once nearly broke you, but the mind says you should be further by now. This is how the ideal self becomes a silent tyrant. It does not scream, it simply measures everything. And the painful part is that this ideal version often looks noble. It may look like discipline, it may look like ambition, it may look like self-improvement. But underneath it, there may be a hidden belief that the person you are right now is not worthy of kindness. So you chase a better version of yourself, not from love, but from rejection. Buddhism does not say you should stop growing. It says you should understand the difference between growth and craving. Growth is gentle, clear, and rooted in awareness. Craving is restless, hungry, and never satisfied. Growth says, I care about my life, so I will take one wise step. Craving says, I cannot accept myself until I become something else. That difference may look small, but it changes everything. The ideal self is usually created from fragments, a little from your parents' expectations, a little from people who rejected you, a little from social media, a little from your younger dreams, a little from shame, a little from watching others succeed. Then the mind stitches these pieces together and says, this is who you must become before you can feel enough. But this image is not real. It has no tired days, it has no confusion, it has no emotional wounds. It never says the wrong thing, it never wastes time, it never feels jealous, lonely, afraid, or uncertain. It is calm all the time, productive all the time, attractive all the time, successful all the time, spiritually wise all the time. And because no human being can live like that, you begin to feel like your normal humanity is failure. This is where endless inner dissatisfaction grows. The problem is not that your life has no value. The problem is that the mind keeps comparing your real life to a fantasy life. It compares your real emotions to an emotionless ideal. It compares your real body to a polished image. It compares your real progress to a perfect timeline that never had to face your pain. And because the comparison is unfair, you always lose. The Buddha taught that suffering grows when we cling to illusions. The ideal self is one of the most seductive illusions because it promises relief. It says, become me and you will finally be safe. But when you get close, it changes shape. If you become successful, it says you must become more successful. If you become calm, it says you must never feel anger again. If you heal one wound, it points to another wound and says, see, you are still not finished. This is why some people cannot enjoy their progress. Their mind has trained them to look only at the distance remaining, never at the distance already crossed. They could be standing in the middle of a miracle and still feel behind, because the ideal self is always standing further ahead, looking disappointed. Buddhist awareness invites you to see this clearly, not to hate the mind for doing it, but to understand why it does it. The mind creates ideals because it wants safety. It believes that if you become perfect enough, nobody will reject you. If you become useful enough, nobody will abandon you. If you become impressive enough, nobody will overlook you. If you become healed enough, nothing will hurt again. So beneath the ideal self, there is often fear. The fear of being ordinary, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of being judged, the fear of being unlovable, the fear of making the same mistakes again, the fear that if you stop pushing yourself, you will fall apart. This is why simply telling yourself, stop comparing, does not always work. The comparison is not just a habit, it is a protection system. The mind believes it is saving you by keeping you dissatisfied. It thinks dissatisfaction will push you into becoming safe. But the truth is, a life built on constant dissatisfaction does not become safe. It becomes exhausting. There is a deep sadness in always treating the present version of yourself as a waiting room. You keep waiting to become the version who deserves love, the version who deserves rest, the version who deserves confidence, the version who deserves joy. But your life is happening now, not later. Your breath is happening now. Your heart is beating now. The people who love you are aging now. The days are passing now. If you keep postponing peace until you become ideal, you may reach the end of many years and realize you were never actually living. You were only preparing to live. Buddhist wisdom brings you back to this moment. It asks you to look at the real person sitting here, not the fantasy, not the edited future self, not the perfect spiritual version, the real one, the one who gets tired, the one who tries, the one who sometimes fails, the one who still carries old pain, the one who wants to be loved but does not always know how to receive love. This is the person who needs compassion, not the imaginary one. And here is the strange truth. The more you reject the real self, the harder it becomes to grow. A plant cannot grow well in poisoned soil. In the same way, a person cannot grow peacefully in the soil of self-disgust. You may force yourself forward for a while, but inside, something becomes dry. You lose softness. You lose joy. You lose the ability to feel grateful for small progress. But when the real self is met with awareness, something changes. You stop wasting so much energy pretending. You stop needing to perform perfection in your own mind. You begin to see clearly what actually needs attention. Not everything, not 100 imaginary flaws, just the next honest step. This is why acceptance is not laziness. Acceptance is clarity. You cannot heal what you refuse to look at honestly. You cannot care for a life you are constantly insulting. You cannot understand your suffering while pretending you should already be beyond it. Acceptance says, "This is where I am." Wisdom says, "Now I can take the next step." The ideal self says, "This is where I should be." Shame says, "So where I am is unacceptable." One creates peace, the other creates war. Many people are afraid of accepting themselves because they think acceptance means they will never change. But look closely. Has years of self-attack truly given you peace? Has hating yourself into improvement made you feel whole? Has chasing the ideal self finally ended the hunger? For many people, the honest answer is no. It made them function, but it did not make them free. Buddhism teaches the middle way. It does not ask you to collapse into laziness, and it does not ask you to torture yourself with perfection. It asks you to walk with awareness, to grow without greed, to improve without hatred, to act without attaching your entire worth to the result. This is difficult because the modern world trains the mind to live outside itself. Everywhere you look, someone is showing a better body, a better home, a better relationship, a better routine, a better face, a better version of life. The mind sees these images and begins to build another ideal. It whispers, "That should be you." But what you are often seeing is not life. It is a selected moment, a polished surface, a small piece of someone else's story. You do not see their fear at night. You do not see the argument before the photo. You do not see the emptiness after the achievement. You do not see the insecurity behind the confidence, yet your mind compares your whole life to their visible fragment. This is not wisdom, this is illusion. The Buddhist path asks you to return to direct experience. What is actually here? What is happening in your body? What is happening in your breath? What thought is rising? What feeling is asking to be seen? When you return to direct experience, the fantasy loses some of its power. You stop living inside mental movies and begin touching reality again. Reality may not be perfect, but it is workable. Fantasy is not. You can care for a real wound. You cannot care for an imaginary perfection. You can take one real step today. You cannot live inside a future version that keeps running away. You can speak kindly to the person you are now. You cannot hug an ideal self that does not exist. One of the deepest reasons the ideal self hurts so much is that it divides you internally. There is the person you are and the person you think you must become. Between them is constant tension. The mind becomes a battlefield of not yet, not successful yet, not attractive yet, not disciplined yet, not healed yet, not confident yet, not worthy yet. But Buddhism teaches that the self itself is not fixed. You are not a solid, permanent failure. You are not a solid, permanent success. You are a changing flow of causes, conditions, thoughts, feelings, habits, memories, and awareness. This means you do not need to worship a fixed ideal identity. You can relate to life more gently, moment by moment. Today, anger may arise. That does not mean you are an angry person forever. Today, sadness may arise. That does not mean you are broken. Today, fear may arise. That does not mean you are weak. These are passing states, not your final identity. The ideal self becomes powerful because the mind believes identity is solid. It says, I must become this fixed, perfect person. But life is not fixed. You are not fixed. Even the version of you that feels unworthy is not fixed. It was formed by conditions, and with awareness, new conditions can form something kinder. This is why mindfulness is so healing. It allows you to see that every thought changes, every emotion changes, every craving changes, every shame story changes. The mind says, I will always feel this way, but awareness notices, no, this too is moving. When you deeply understand impermanence, the ideal self begins to lose its grip. You no longer need to freeze yourself into a perfect image. You can allow life to unfold. You can allow growth to be human. You can allow healing to be uneven. You can allow yourself to be a work in progress without turning that into an insult. There is peace in realizing you do not have to become an imaginary person to be worthy of compassion. You only have to wake up to the suffering caused by chasing that person. This does not happen in one moment. The mind will still compare. It will still create fantasies. It will still say, you should be better. But now you can answer differently. Not with anger, not with another fight. You can simply notice, the mind is creating an ideal again. The mind is reaching for a future self because it feels unsafe now. That gentle noticing is powerful. It removes blame. It turns inner criticism into understanding. You begin to see the ideal self not as truth, but as a mental construction, a dream made of fear and desire. And when you see a dream as a dream, you do not have to obey it completely. You can still have goals. You can still build a better life. You can still learn, practice, heal, and change. But now your goals are no longer weapons pointed at your current self. They become paths of care. You are not running away from who you are. You are walking with who you are. That is a very different life. A person who runs from themselves is never at home. No matter where they go, the pressure follows. But a person who learns to sit with themselves begins to carry home inside their own awareness. This is why the Buddhist path is not about becoming special. It is about becoming awake. Awake to craving, awake to comparison, awake to the stories that create suffering, awake to the simple truth that peace cannot be found by hating the present moment and worshipping a future one. The mind may say, one day when I become ideal, I will finally be kind to myself. But Buddhism gently turns that sentence around and says, be kind now, and from that kindness, a wiser life can grow. Because the real transformation you are seeking does not begin when you finally become perfect. It begins when you stop making perfection the price of peace. And maybe the version of you that needs love the most is not the future self who has everything figured out. Maybe it is the tired self reading these words right now, the one who has been trying for so long, the one who has carried quiet disappointment, the one who keeps comparing, hoping, failing, rising, and trying again. That self does not need another impossible standard tonight. That self needs a moment of mercy. The ideal you may look beautiful in the mind, but it cannot breathe for you. It cannot live this day for you. It cannot heal the pain you keep ignoring. Only awareness can do that. Only compassion can do that. Only the gentle honesty of returning to yourself can do that. So let the fantasy loosen a little. Let the perfect image step back. Let the real person be here, not as a failure, not as a project, not as something unfinished and shameful, but as a living human being, worthy of patience while becoming, worthy of kindness while learning, worthy of peace even before everything is fixed. Because the mind will always be able to invent a better version of you. But your soul does not need an invention. It needs presence. It needs truth. It needs the end of this endless chase. And when you stop chasing the impossible self, you may finally hear the quiet wisdom underneath all that noise, whispering that you were never meant to become a perfect image. You were meant to awaken from the image, return to this breath, and discover that the person you kept trying to escape was the very person who needed your love all along. And after spending so many years chasing the ideal version of yourself, another painful pattern slowly begins to reveal itself. Many people do not only want to become better, they want to become necessary. Deep down, they believe that if they are useful enough, helpful enough, selfless enough, or important enough to other people, then maybe they will finally deserve love. So they spend their lives giving, fixing, rescuing, carrying, and sacrificing, hoping their usefulness will protect them from abandonment. But there is a hidden exhaustion that comes from constantly earning your place in people's lives. Some people are terrified of being alone, but the deeper fear is not loneliness itself. The deeper fear is becoming unnecessary, becoming replaceable, becoming forgettable. Many people can tolerate stress, pressure, and emotional exhaustion far more easily than they can tolerate feeling unwanted. So they become useful. They become the helper in every crisis, the responsible one in the family, the emotional caretaker in relationships, the person who solves problems at work, the one everyone calls during emergencies, the one who never says no, the one who listens to everyone else while quietly ignoring their own pain. At first, this behavior often looks admirable. Society praises people who sacrifice themselves endlessly. People call them loyal, dependable, caring, generous, hardworking. But underneath this constant giving, there is sometimes a hidden emotional hunger that even the person themselves does not fully understand. They are not only helping because they want to help, they are helping because being needed makes them feel safe. The moment someone depends on them, they feel valuable. The moment someone praises their support, they feel temporarily worthy. The moment someone says, "I do not know what I would do without you," something deep inside them relaxes for a second, but only for a second, because the feeling never lasts long. Soon, the mind begins searching again for another reason to prove usefulness, another person to save, another burden to carry, another problem to solve, another way to earn emotional security. This is the addiction to being needed. Buddhism teaches that attachment creates suffering, and one of the strongest forms of attachment is attachment to identity. In this case, the identity becomes, "I am valuable because people need me." The mind clings tightly to this role because it fears what might happen without it. If nobody needs me, who am I? If I stop helping everyone, will they still love me? If I cannot provide something useful, do I still deserve connection? These questions often remain hidden beneath the surface, but they quietly shape entire lives. Many people learned this pattern in childhood. Love may have felt conditional. Attention may have come only when they performed well, behaved maturely, solved problems, or took care of others. Emotionally, some children became the peacemaker in chaotic homes. Some became the emotional support system for parents who were struggling. Some learned that expressing their own needs created rejection, so they focused entirely on meeting the needs of others. Slowly, the child learns a dangerous lesson. My worth depends on what I can provide. So they grow into adults who feel guilty resting, guilty saying no, guilty disappointing people, guilty prioritizing themselves. Their nervous system becomes trained to scan constantly for who needs help, who needs fixing, who needs emotional support. And because they are often deeply empathetic people, they become very skilled at noticing the emotions of others while remaining disconnected from their own exhaustion. Buddhist awareness helps reveal how painful this cycle truly becomes. A person addicted to being needed often loses contact with their authentic self because their entire identity revolves around usefulness. They become so focused on serving others that they no longer know how to simply exist without performing a role. This creates a strange emptiness. Even when surrounded by people, they feel unseen. People may appreciate what they do, but rarely understand who they are beneath the role they play. The helper becomes emotionally invisible, and eventually resentment quietly begins to grow. Not because they are selfish, but because human beings are not designed to endlessly abandon themselves. A person may spend years giving without limits, but deep inside there is still a longing to be cared for too, to be chosen without needing to earn it, to be loved without constantly proving usefulness. Yet many people trapped in this pattern do not know how to receive love freely. When someone offers care without conditions, it feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, even suspicious. The mind says, "What do they want from me?" because love without performance feels emotionally unsafe. This is one reason some people attract emotionally dependent relationships. Their identity becomes tied to rescuing others. They feel most connected when someone is struggling because suffering gives them a purpose. Chaos gives them a role. Being needed gives them temporary meaning. But relationships built entirely around rescue often become painful. The helper slowly becomes exhausted, while the other person may become dependent. Boundaries disappear. The relationship loses balance. One person keeps giving, the other keeps taking. Eventually, both people suffer. Buddhism teaches compassion, but it also teaches wisdom. Compassion without wisdom becomes self-destruction. Helping others while abandoning yourself internally is not true peace. It is attachment disguised as love. This can be difficult to accept because many people built their entire sense of identity around sacrifice. They fear that if they stop overgiving, they will become selfish or unlovable. But there is a difference between healthy compassion and emotional self-erasure. Healthy compassion says, "I care about others deeply, but I also care about my own well-being." Self-erasure says, "My needs do not matter unless everyone else is okay first." One creates balance, the other creates burnout. The Buddha understood that suffering often comes from clinging to roles and identities. The rescuer identity is especially dangerous because it hides behind goodness. A person can spend years believing they are simply kind-hearted while never realizing they are terrified of becoming emotionally unnecessary. This fear becomes especially painful when relationships change. Children grow up, partners become independent, friends stop needing support, work roles disappear. Suddenly the person feels lost because the role that once gave them worth begins fading away. Many people experience deep emotional crises during these transitions because they never learned how to separate usefulness from existence itself. Without someone to rescue, they feel empty. Without constant responsibility, they feel anxious. Silence becomes uncomfortable because the mind no longer has a role to hide inside. This is why some people unconsciously create situations where they continue being needed. They overhelp, overprotect, overextend. They involve themselves in problems that are not truly theirs to carry. Sometimes they even stay in unhealthy relationships because suffering gives them purpose. Buddhist wisdom gently asks an uncomfortable question. Can you still feel worthy when nobody is asking anything from you? Can you sit quietly with yourself without needing to prove value? Can you rest without earning the right to rest first? Can you believe you deserve love even when you are not solving someone's problems? For many people, these questions feel deeply threatening because their entire nervous system has been trained around performance. The addiction to being needed also affects how people handle boundaries. Saying no feels terrifying because boundaries risk disappointing others. And disappointment feels emotionally dangerous to someone who equates approval with safety. So they say yes when they are tired, yes when they are overwhelmed, yes when they need space, yes when their body is exhausted. Then later, they feel emotionally drained and confused about why life feels so heavy. The weight does not only come from helping others, it comes from constantly betraying themselves in order to maintain connection. Buddhism teaches that attachment creates fear because whatever the mind clings to eventually becomes unstable. If your worth depends entirely on being needed, then every moment of independence from others feels threatening. You may unconsciously fear people healing, growing, or no longer depending on you because your identity is attached to their dependence. This creates hidden suffering inside relationships. True love allows freedom. Attachment fears freedom. A person trapped in the need to feel needed may unconsciously confuse control with care. They may over-involve themselves in others' decisions, emotions, and struggles because helping makes them feel emotionally secure. But real compassion respects the other person's path. It does not need to control outcomes to feel valuable. The Buddha often taught about the importance of balance. A healthy life is not built through extremes. Endless self-sacrifice is an extreme. Endless self-focus is another extreme. Wisdom walks between them. One of the deepest forms of healing happens when a person realizes they are allowed to exist beyond usefulness. Their value is not measured by productivity, emotional labor, or sacrifice. Their existence itself has dignity. This sounds simple, but emotionally it can feel revolutionary. Many people have spent decades believing they must earn every form of love through effort. So when they stop performing, fear rises immediately. The mind whispers, "If you stop giving, people will leave." And sometimes painful experiences from the past reinforce this belief. Maybe love was withdrawn during childhood whenever they disappointed someone. Maybe affection depended on achievement. Maybe they were praised only when helping others. The nervous system learned that connection was conditional. But Buddhism teaches that clinging to conditions creates suffering. If you believe your right to love depends entirely on usefulness, peace becomes impossible because no human being can endlessly perform without collapsing internally. This is why many chronic helpers secretly feel lonely. They are surrounded by people who depend on them, but very few people truly know them. Vulnerability feels difficult because they are used to being strong for everyone else. Receiving support feels uncomfortable because their identity is built around giving support. Some people even feel ashamed of having needs at all. They apologize for asking for help. They hide their exhaustion. They minimize their pain. They say, "I'm fine," while quietly breaking inside. Over time, this emotional suppression creates disconnection from the self. The person becomes so focused outward that they stop listening inward. Their body may feel tense all the time. Their emotions may feel numb. They may lose touch with joy because their life revolves entirely around responsibility. Buddhist mindfulness helps bring awareness back inward. It teaches you to notice your own suffering too, not only the suffering of others. This is not selfishness, it is balance. You begin asking different questions. What do I actually feel right now? What happens inside me when someone is disappointed with me? Why do I panic when I cannot help everyone? Why do I feel guilty resting? Why does being needed feel safer than simply being loved? These questions open the door to understanding, and understanding softens shame. The goal is not to stop caring about people. The goal is to stop using usefulness as proof of worth. A person can still be compassionate without abandoning themselves. A person can still help others without needing their identity to depend on it. This creates healthier relationships because love is no longer built entirely around emotional labor. The person can finally say yes freely instead of fearfully. They can help because they genuinely choose to, not because their nervous system panics at the possibility of rejection. There is also a deep spiritual exhaustion that comes from trying to carry everyone emotionally. Many people secretly believe it is their responsibility to save others from pain. But Buddhism teaches that suffering is part of human existence. You cannot remove all suffering from the world through overgiving. Sometimes wisdom means allowing others to walk their own path. Sometimes compassion means stepping back. Sometimes love means recognizing that your constant rescuing may actually prevent another person from growing. This can feel heartbreaking to someone addicted to being needed because helping gives them identity. Without the role of rescuer, they may feel exposed, empty, uncertain about who they really are. But beneath that uncertainty, something important begins waiting. The possibility of discovering a self that does not need constant external confirmation. A self that can breathe without proving. A self that can rest without guilt. A self that understands love is not something earned through exhaustion. This healing often happens slowly. The mind will still want approval. It will still want to feel important. It will still feel uncomfortable disappointing people. But awareness changes the relationship with these feelings. Instead of automatically sacrificing yourself, you begin noticing the fear underneath the impulse. Instead of saying yes immediately, you pause. Instead of overextending yourself to feel worthy, you ask whether the action comes from compassion or fear. That pause creates freedom, because for the first time, your actions are no longer completely controlled by the need for validation. Buddhism teaches that freedom does not come from controlling the world around you. It comes from understanding the attachments inside you. The attachment to being needed is powerful because it disguises itself as virtue. But once you see the suffering underneath it, the heart naturally longs for something more balanced. Not selfishness, not isolation, not emotional coldness, but peaceful connection without self-erasure. You begin learning that your worth does not disappear when you rest. Your dignity does not disappear when someone is disappointed. Your existence does not lose value because another person no longer depends on you. You are more than a role, more than a function, more than a source of emotional labor, more than what you provide. This realization can feel deeply emotional because many people have never heard these words before. Their entire life taught them the opposite. But Buddhist compassion includes the self too. The Buddha never taught people to destroy themselves for approval. He taught awareness, balance, compassion, and freedom from attachment. That includes freedom from the attachment to usefulness as identity. And maybe one of the most healing moments in life is when you finally realize that love given freely feels very different from love earned through exhaustion. One leaves you drained, the other leaves you peaceful. One keeps you trapped in performance, the other allows you to simply exist. And perhaps the deepest truth is this: the people who truly love you will not only value what you do for them, they will value your presence, your humanity, your honesty, your spirit. They will not require your suffering as proof of devotion. Because real love does not ask you to disappear inside service. Real love allows you to remain whole. And the moment you stop measuring your worth through usefulness, another kind of healing quietly begins. Not the healing of becoming more impressive, but the healing of finally believing that your existence alone does not need constant justification. That is the moment the addiction starts losing its grip. That is the moment you begin returning home to yourself. And when a person finally stops measuring their worth through usefulness, another hidden wound often rises quietly to the surface. Beneath the overgiving, beneath the people-pleasing, beneath the fear of disappointing others, there is sometimes a child who learned something deeply painful very early in life. The fear was not simply being alone. The fear was being emotionally replaceable, being forgotten, being left behind the moment someone better appeared. That fear follows many people into adulthood without them even realizing it. There is a specific kind of heartbreak that begins long before adult relationships. It begins in childhood, when the nervous system first learns whether love feels safe or uncertain. Some children grow up feeling emotionally held. They feel seen, protected, reassured, and consistently valued. But other children grow up quietly studying the emotional weather of the people around them, constantly trying to figure out whether love will stay or disappear. A child does not need to be physically abandoned to fear abandonment. Emotional inconsistency alone can create deep insecurity. A parent who is loving one day and cold the next. A caregiver who withdraws affection during stress. Constant. Comparison between siblings. Feeling ignored unless performing well. Watching attention always move towards someone else. Living in a home where emotional safety feels unpredictable. The child begins noticing these patterns silently. And because children naturally personalize everything, they often reach one painful conclusion. If love disappears, something must be wrong with me. This belief settles deep into the body. Years later, the adult may not consciously remember the original moments, but the fear still lives inside them. It appears in relationships, in friendships, in social situations, in tiny emotional reactions that seem irrational on the surface but feel overwhelming internally. A delayed text message suddenly creates anxiety. Someone becoming distant feels terrifying. Being excluded from plans feels deeply painful. Watching a loved one give attention to someone else creates panic. Even small changes in tone or behavior can awaken old fear. This is because the nervous system is not reacting only to the present moment. It is reacting to accumulated emotional memory. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment becomes painful when the mind clings to external things for emotional security. But before attachment becomes romantic or social, it often begins as survival. The child attaches desperately because connection feels necessary for emotional safety. When that safety becomes unstable, the child learns to monitor love carefully. They become hyper-aware of emotional shifts, hyper-aware of rejection, hyper-aware of replacement. Some children respond by becoming extremely pleasing. They try to become easier to love, more impressive, more useful, more agreeable. Others become emotionally withdrawn because vulnerability feels dangerous. Some become clingy in relationships. Others avoid intimacy entirely while secretly craving it deeply. Different coping mechanisms form, but underneath many of them is the same fear. If I am not enough, someone else will take my place. This fear creates enormous suffering because it turns relationships into emotional survival tests. The person may deeply love others, but beneath the love is constant vigilance. The nervous system never fully relaxes because it expects abandonment eventually. Even happy moments become fragile. Part of the mind keeps scanning for signs of change. This creates exhaustion. Many people with abandonment wounds secretly struggle to trust peace. When relationships feel stable, they become anxious, waiting for something to go wrong. They may overanalyze conversations, seek constant reassurance, or emotionally prepare themselves for rejection before rejection even happens. The painful irony is that the fear of abandonment can sometimes create behaviors that push people away. Anxiety becomes controlling, insecurity becomes emotional dependency, fear becomes jealousy, silence becomes overthinking. The person may desperately want connection while unknowingly creating tension around the relationship itself. Buddhist awareness helps reveal that much of this suffering comes from attachment mixed with fear. The mind clings tightly because it believes another person is the source of emotional survival. The relationship stops feeling like connection and starts feeling like protection from inner emptiness. But no human being can permanently remove another person's abandonment wound. This is why reassurance often feels temporary. Someone says, "I love you," and relief appears briefly. But later the fear returns again. Someone stays loyal for years, but one small emotional shift can still trigger panic inside the wounded nervous system. The wound is not healed by endless reassurance alone, because the fear was formed long before the current relationship even existed. Many people carry a younger version of themselves into every relationship without realizing it. The adult body grows older, but emotionally, a frightened child may still be asking the same question they asked years ago. Will you leave me too? This question quietly shapes behavior. Some people become extremely accommodating because they believe disagreement risks abandonment. They suppress their needs to avoid conflict. They become emotionally available to everyone while neglecting themselves. They fear that expressing anger, sadness, or disappointment will make others stop loving them. Others become emotionally guarded. They avoid closeness because attachment feels dangerous. If nobody gets too close, nobody can deeply hurt them. But underneath the distance is often profound loneliness. Both patterns come from the same wound. The fear of emotional replacement also creates comparison. A person constantly measures themselves against others, searching for evidence that they are losing value. Social media intensifies this suffering because the mind endlessly compares appearance, success, popularity, attractiveness, and social connection. The wounded mind says, "Why would someone choose me when there are better people available?" This thought becomes poison to inner peace. Buddhism teaches that comparison grows from illusion because the mind creates solid identities and rankings that do not truly exist in permanent form. But the fearful nervous system still searches desperately for certainty. It wants guarantees that love cannot be taken away, yet life offers no permanent guarantees. People change, relationships change, circumstances change, bodies change, emotions change. This truth can feel terrifying at first, but Buddhism teaches something deeper beneath it. True peace does not come from controlling change. It comes from developing inner stability within change itself. This is where healing begins, not by forcing people to stay forever, not by becoming perfect enough to avoid abandonment, but by slowly building a relationship with yourself that does not collapse every time connection feels uncertain. Many people with abandonment wounds never learned how to emotionally stay with themselves during pain. The moment fear appears, they panic internally. They seek reassurance immediately. They distract themselves. They overthink. They emotionally chase. They collapse into shame. But Buddhist mindfulness teaches a different approach. Instead of running from fear, you learn to sit beside it. You begin noticing the sensation of abandonment fear inside the body, the tightness in the chest, the racing thoughts, the sinking feeling in the stomach, the urge to seek immediate reassurance. Instead of judging these feelings, awareness simply notices them gently. This is powerful because wounded people often attack themselves for having fear at all. Why am I like this? Why am I so needy? Why can't I relax? But self-judgment only deepens suffering. Compassion creates healing. The Buddha never taught that humans should become emotionless. He taught awareness toward emotional suffering without becoming consumed by it. When abandonment fear appears, the goal is not pretending you do not care. The goal is learning not to disappear into panic. This takes practice because the nervous system may have spent years associating emotional distance with danger. One of the most healing realizations is understanding that your worth does not disappear simply because someone pulls away emotionally. Their behavior may hurt. Their absence may create grief. but their distance does not erase your humanity. The child inside may still believe abandonment means defectiveness. But awareness slowly begins teaching a new truth. People leaving is painful, but it is not proof of worthlessness. This distinction matters deeply because many wounded people unconsciously turn every rejection into identity. A breakup becomes, "I am unlovable." Being ignored becomes, "I am forgettable." Someone choosing another person becomes, "I was never enough." But Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when the mind turns temporary experiences into permanent identity stories. Pain is real, loss is real, grief is real, but the story, "I am fundamentally replaceable and worthless," is an interpretation created by wounded attachment. And because the mind repeats the story constantly, it begins feeling true. This is why awareness is so important. Awareness interrupts automatic identification with painful narratives. You begin noticing the difference between what happened and the meaning your wounded mind attached to what happened. Someone becoming distant may trigger old wounds, but the deeper suffering often comes from the story the mind immediately creates afterward. "They do not need me anymore. I was never special. I am easy to replace. Everyone leaves eventually." These thoughts feel real because they are emotionally charged, but Buddhism asks you to observe them carefully instead of automatically believing them. Thoughts are mental events, not final truth. The wounded nervous system speaks in absolutes because it is trying to protect itself from future pain. But protection built entirely from fear eventually becomes imprisonment. Some people become so terrified of abandonment that they stop expressing their authentic self. They shapeshift emotionally to maintain connection. They mirror others constantly. They hide opinions, hide needs, hide boundaries. They become whoever they think others will keep. But this creates another painful problem. Even when people stay, the person still feels unseen because nobody truly knows them beneath the performance. This creates deep loneliness inside relationships. Healing requires something terrifying but necessary, allowing yourself to exist honestly, even when it risks disapproval. This does not mean becoming emotionally reckless. It means slowly learning that authentic connection cannot grow through constant self-erasure. Buddhist teachings on non-attachment are often misunderstood. Non-attachment does not mean coldness or emotional detachment. It means loving without turning another person into the foundation of your existence. This creates a very different kind of relationship. Love becomes freer, softer, less desperate. You stop trying to emotionally cage people in order to feel safe. You stop measuring your value entirely through their attention. You stop collapsing every time connection changes slightly. Not because you stop caring, but because your entire identity no longer depends on external reassurance. This kind of inner security develops slowly, especially for people who grew up emotionally unsafe. The nervous system may still react strongly for a long time. Healing abandonment wounds is rarely quick because these fears were often formed before language itself fully developed. The body remembers what the conscious mind forgets. This is why some people feel overwhelming emotional pain in situations that seem small externally. The present moment touches old emotional memory stored deep in the nervous system. A delayed response, a cancelled plan, a cold tone, a moment of exclusion. Suddenly the body reacts as though survival itself is threatened. Buddhist mindfulness helps slow this process down. You begin noticing the reaction without immediately becoming controlled by it. You breathe, you observe, you remind yourself gently that fear is arising, but fear is not always reality. This creates space between the trigger and the reaction, and inside that space, healing becomes possible. Many people with abandonment wounds also struggle deeply with self-soothing. They were never taught how to emotionally comfort themselves safely. Their nervous system learned to seek stability entirely outside itself. But Buddhism teaches the importance of developing inner refuge, not isolation, not emotional numbness. Inner refuge means learning how to remain emotionally present with yourself during uncertainty, learning how to breathe through loneliness without immediately panicking, learning how to sit with discomfort without collapsing into self-hatred, learning how to comfort the frightened parts of yourself gently instead of abandoning yourself internally. This changes relationships because you stop expecting other people to constantly rescue you from your own emotional wounds. You can love deeply without drowning. You can care without clinging. You can grieve without losing yourself completely. One of the deepest Buddhist lessons is that all things are impermanent. At first, wounded people often resist this teaching because impermanence feels terrifying. They want certainty, permanent reassurance, permanent guarantees. But eventually, something softer emerges from understanding impermanence. You begin appreciating connection more honestly. You stop demanding impossible promises from life. You stop trying to freeze people into fixed emotional positions. You realize that love is meaningful partly because life changes. This awareness can create deeper gratitude instead of deeper fear. Instead of constantly asking, "Will this last forever?" you begin learning how to fully meet the present moment while it exists. This reduces suffering because the mind is no longer fighting reality itself. At the same time, Buddhism teaches that impermanence applies to pain too. The abandonment wound itself is not permanent. The fear itself changes. The nervous system itself can heal. The patterns themselves can soften. A person who once panicked constantly can slowly become calmer. A person who once believed they were emotionally replaceable can slowly develop inner stability. A person who once chased reassurance endlessly can eventually feel safer within themselves. This healing often begins with compassion toward the younger self who carried these fears for so long. Not pity, not shame, compassion. Because that younger self was trying to survive emotionally with the tools available at the time. The child who became clingy was trying to stay connected. The child who became invisible was trying to avoid rejection. The child who became perfect was trying to secure love. The child who became hyper-independent was trying to avoid disappointment. These strategies were not signs of weakness, they were survival adaptations. But adulthood creates the opportunity to slowly build new ways of relating to fear. The goal is not becoming someone who never feels abandonment pain again. The goal is becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves whenever fear appears. That is the real transformation, because many wounded people learned to attack themselves the moment they felt emotionally insecure. They called themselves needy, broken, weak, dramatic, too sensitive. They repeated the cruelty they once absorbed from others. Healing begins when that inner violence softens. When fear appears, you no longer say, "What is wrong with me?" You say, "A wounded part of me feels afraid right now." That small shift creates enormous emotional safety internally. And over time, the nervous system begins learning something new. Love can exist without panic. Connection can exist without constant performance. You can survive emotional uncertainty without losing your worth. You can be deeply loved without becoming perfect. Most importantly, you begin realizing that your value was never determined by whether someone stayed, left, chose you, or overlooked you. Human beings are not objects competing for emotional survival, yet wounded attachment often turns life into exactly that. Every interaction becomes a test of worthiness. Buddhist awareness gently ends this war, not by making you emotionally cold, but by helping you discover a deeper stability underneath attachment itself. A quiet place inside you that remains whole even when relationships change. a quiet awareness that notices fear without becoming consumed by it. A quiet compassion that stays beside you when old wounds reopen. And perhaps that is the deepest healing of all. Not becoming impossible to hurt, not becoming emotionally detached, but finally learning that even if someone leaves, even if connection changes, even if life breaks your heart sometimes, you do not have to lose yourself in the process. Because the child who once feared being emotionally replaceable was always searching for one thing underneath everything else. Not perfection, not endless reassurance, not control, safety. And slowly, through awareness, compassion, and inner presence, you begin becoming the safe place that child was searching for all along. And once you begin to understand the childhood fear of being emotionally replaceable, another painful truth becomes easier to recognize. A frightened heart does not receive praise and criticism equally. Praise may touch the surface for a moment, but criticism often sinks straight into the wound. The kind word feels pleasant, but the harsh word feels like evidence. And this is where the ego quietly begins collecting pain, as if pain is the only truth it can trust. There is something deeply tiring about receiving 10 kind words and still being haunted by the one cruel sentence. Someone may praise your effort, your heart, your growth, your beauty, your intelligence, your kindness, and for a brief moment, something inside you feels warm. But then one person criticizes you, rejects you, mocks you, misunderstands you, or speaks carelessly, and suddenly the praise disappears like smoke. The criticism stays. It repeats itself at night. It appears while you are trying to rest. It follows you into silence. It becomes louder than everything good that was said before. This is not because you are weak. It is because the ego is deeply attached to pain when pain seems connected to identity. The ego does not simply hear criticism as information. It hears criticism as threat. It says, "This proves what I feared. This proves I am not enough. This proves I can be rejected. This proves I am unsafe." So the mind holds the painful word tightly, not because it enjoys suffering, but because it believes remembering the wound will protect you from being wounded again. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the mind clings not only to pleasure, but also to pain. This may sound strange at first, because nobody consciously wants to suffer. But look carefully. The mind replays painful comments again and again. It returns to old humiliations. It rehearses arguments that are already over. It remembers the face of the person who judged you. It remembers the tone. It remembers the exact sentence. It even remembers criticism from years ago more clearly than praise from yesterday. Why does this happen? Because pain gives the ego something solid to hold. Praise feels light, uncertain, temporary. Criticism feels heavy, serious, permanent. The ego trusts heaviness because it mistakes intensity for truth. If something hurts deeply, the mind assumes it must mean something deeply true. But Buddhism teaches that intensity is not the same as truth. A thought can be loud and still be false. A memory can be painful and still be incomplete. A criticism can hurt and still not define you. Many people carry criticism like hidden stones inside the heart. A teacher once said something cruel. A parent compared them to someone else. A friend laughed at their weakness. A partner made them feel unwanted. A stranger mocked their appearance. A boss dismissed their effort. Years pass, but the words remain fresh because the mind turned them into identity. This is where suffering deepens. Criticism is no longer just something that happened. It becomes something the person believes they are. Someone says, "You are too sensitive," and the mind says, "My feelings are a problem." Someone says, "You always fail," and the mind says, "Trying is dangerous." Someone says, "You are not special," and the mind says, "I must prove myself forever." Someone says, "Nobody will love you like this," and the mind says, I must hide parts of myself. The original sentence may have lasted only a few seconds, but the inner wound can last for decades when awareness is absent. Buddhism asks us to look at this process with honesty. The problem is not only that someone criticized you. The deeper problem is that the mind clung to the criticism, repeated it, decorated it with meaning, and then used it as a mirror. A dirty mirror will always distort the face in front of it. In the same way, a wounded ego will always distort the meaning of criticism. Praise feels temporary because the ego does not know how to rest in goodness. If the mind has been trained by fear, kindness feels suspicious, compliments feel fragile, love feels like something that may disappear. So even when praise comes, the ego quickly questions it. They are just being nice. They do not really mean it. They do not know the real me. If they knew my flaws, they would not say that. This is how the mind rejects medicine while protecting poison. Criticism, on the other hand, is accepted quickly because it matches the old wound. If you already secretly fear that you are not enough, any negative word feels familiar. Familiar pain often feels more believable than unfamiliar kindness. This is one of the saddest patterns in the human mind. A person may reject love because it feels new, but accept pain because it feels known. The Buddha taught that ignorance is not simply lack of knowledge, it is mistaken seeing. It is seeing something untrue and believing it is reality. When the ego is wounded, it sees criticism as final truth and praise as temporary decoration. But both are passing sounds, both arise and disappear. Neither contains the whole of who you are. This does not mean all criticism should be ignored. Buddhism does not teach denial. Wise criticism can help you grow. Honest feedback can reveal blind spots. A compassionate correction can guide you. But there is a difference between learning from feedback and becoming imprisoned by judgment. Feedback points to an action. Shame attacks the self. Wisdom asks, what can be learned here? The ego says, what does this prove about me? That difference matters. When criticism enters a mind without awareness, it becomes a weapon. But when criticism enters awareness, it can be examined. Is this true? Is it useful? Is it complete? Was it spoken from wisdom, anger, projection, jealousy, pain, or misunderstanding? Does this point to something I can improve? Or is this simply someone else's suffering spilling onto me? Most people do not ask these questions. They simply absorb the criticism as if every painful word deserves a home inside them. But not every voice deserves a temple in your mind. Not every opinion deserves authority over your worth. Some criticism comes from people who do not even understand themselves. Some comes from envy. Some comes from emotional immaturity. Some comes from control. Some comes from fear. Some comes from people repeating what was once done to them. If you receive every harsh word as truth, you will end up building your identity from the wounds of others. Buddhist awareness gives you the power to pause before swallowing pain whole. That pause is sacred. A word is spoken. A feeling rises. The chest tightens. The ego wants to react. But awareness gently says, let me look at this before I become it. In that moment, freedom begins. The ego's fixation on pain is also connected to survival. The mind evolved to remember danger because danger mattered. A beautiful sunset did not threaten survival, but a snake in the grass did. In emotional life, criticism can feel like danger because rejection once threatened belonging. For a child, losing love or approval can feel frightening. So the mind learns to track criticism carefully. But adulthood requires a new wisdom. Not every criticism is a snake. Not every disapproval is danger. Not every negative opinion is a threat to your existence. Without awareness, the nervous system treats emotional discomfort like survival danger, and the ego rushes in to protect identity. This is why one harsh comment online can ruin an entire day. The body reacts before wisdom has time to speak. The mind becomes defensive, ashamed, angry, or obsessed. It wants to fix the image. It wants to prove the critic wrong. It wants to erase the discomfort immediately. But Buddhism teaches that discomfort itself can become a teacher if you stop running from it. When criticism hurts deeply, instead of only focusing on the critic, you can gently ask, "What part of me did this touch?" Often, the pain is not only about the comment, it is about the old wound underneath it. A stranger says you are not good enough, and the wound remembers childhood comparison. A partner criticizes your emotions, and the wound remembers being dismissed. A friend makes a joke, and the wound remembers humiliation. A boss questions your work, and the wound remembers the fear of failure. The present comment opens an old room in the heart. This is why reactions can feel larger than the situation itself. You are not only reacting to now, you are reacting to every time a similar wound was touched before. Buddhist practice helps by bringing kindness to the wound instead of only fighting the trigger. The criticism becomes an opportunity to see what still needs care. Not because the critic was right, but because your pain is revealing where attachment remains. The ego wants praise because praise temporarily strengthens identity. It says, "I am good, I am admired, I am safe." But because identity is unstable, praise cannot provide lasting peace. The ego needs more and more. One compliment fades, so another is needed. One success fades, so another must come. This creates dependency. Criticism feels permanent because it threatens the identity the ego is trying to maintain. If praise builds the ego's house, criticism feels like someone throwing stones at the windows. But Buddhism asks a deeper question. What if peace does not come from building a stronger ego house? What if peace comes from no longer mistaking the house for who you are? This is not easy to understand at first, because most people are trained to live through image. How do I appear? What do they think of me? Am I respected? Am I admired? Am I seen as successful? Am I liked? Am I attractive? Am I impressive? The ego spends enormous energy maintaining this image, but the image is fragile. A single criticism can crack it. This is why people who depend heavily on external approval often suffer deeply from criticism. Their identity is tied to reflection. If the world reflects admiration, they feel worthy. If the world reflects disapproval, they feel broken. But a life built on reflection can never be stable because people's opinions are always changing. Today they praise you. Tomorrow they misunderstand you. Today they admire you. Tomorrow they ignore you. Today they clap. Tomorrow they criticize. If your peace depends on controlling these reflections, peace will always remain unstable. The Buddhist path does not ask you to stop caring completely. It asks you to stop worshipping opinion as truth. Praise and blame are both part of life. The Buddha himself was praised by many and criticized by others. Even the wisest beings are not free from misunderstanding. So why do we believe our peace should depend on universal approval? There is no version of you that everyone will approve of. If you are kind, some will call you weak. If you are confident, some will call you arrogant. If you are quiet, some will call you boring. If you speak, some will call you too much. If you succeed, some will envy you. If you fail, some will judge you. If you change, some will miss the old you. If you stay the same, some will say you are not growing. Trying to arrange yourself so nobody criticizes you is like trying to stop the wind with your hands. It cannot be done. So the deeper question is not, how do I avoid criticism? The deeper question is, how do I remain awake when criticism comes? This is where inner freedom begins. When praise comes, receive it gently, but do not build your whole identity on it. When criticism comes, examine it carefully, but do not let it become your name. Both are visitors. Neither should become your master. The ego suffers because it wants to freeze every experience into identity. Praise becomes, I am amazing. Criticism becomes, I am worthless. Awareness sees both as passing conditions. A kind word arises and passes. A harsh word arises and passes. A feeling arises and passes. The self you are protecting so fiercely is also changing moment by moment. This understanding softens the grip of both pride and shame. You become less desperate for praise because you no longer need it to exist. You become less destroyed by criticism because you no longer treat it as final truth. This does not make you cold, it makes you steady. And steadiness is one of the greatest gifts of Buddhist practice. A steady person can listen without collapsing. They can receive praise without becoming addicted. They can receive correction without drowning in shame. They can be misunderstood without immediately abandoning themselves. This is emotional maturity, not numbness, but balance. Many people confuse sensitivity with weakness, but often the sensitive person is not weak. They simply have old wounds close to the surface. A small criticism touches something deep, and the whole inner world reacts. The goal is not to become hard. The goal is to become spacious. A spacious mind has room for discomfort without being consumed by it. A spacious heart can feel pain without turning pain into identity. A spacious awareness can hear criticism and still remain connected to dignity. This is why meditation is so powerful. In meditation, you practice watching thoughts without obeying every thought. You practice feeling sensations without turning every sensation into a story. You practice letting experiences arise and pass. Over time, this teaches the nervous system that not everything requires panic. A harsh word may still hurt, but it no longer has to possess you. A painful memory may still arise, but it no longer has to define the day. A criticism may still sting, but it no longer has to become a life sentence. The ego wants to keep pain alive because it believes pain is protection. But awareness sees that endlessly replaying pain often becomes another form of suffering. Remembering a lesson is useful. Rehearsing humiliation forever is imprisonment. There is a difference between wisdom and rumination. Wisdom learns once, rumination bleeds repeatedly. Many people do not realize they are keeping criticism alive by mentally repeating it. The person who criticized them may have moved on, but inside the mind, the event is still happening. The voice is still speaking. The shame is still fresh. The body still reacts. This is how the past continues living in the present. Buddhist practice invites you to notice when you are replaying old criticism and gently return to now. Not by forcing the memory away, but by recognizing, this is a memory. This is not happening now. This is a thought. This is a feeling. This is pain asking for attention. When you relate to the memory this way, you stop feeding it as identity. You bring compassion to the part that still hurts. Sometimes the criticism that feels most permanent is the one you secretly agree with. That is why it cuts so deeply. If someone says something that has no connection to your insecurity, it may annoy you, but it does not destroy you. But when their words touch a belief you already carry, the wound opens. This is why self-worth matters so deeply. A person with inner security can still feel hurt by criticism, but they are less likely to become the criticism. They have an inner home to return to. A person without inner security may wander inside the critic's words for years. Buddhist healing does not depend on forcing yourself to believe positive things. It begins with seeing clearly. What belief did this criticism touch? Where did that belief begin? Who taught me to see myself this way? Is this belief truly mine, or was it handed to me by someone else's pain? These questions loosen the roots of shame. You may discover that the criticism you carry was never wisdom. It was someone else's impatience, someone else's ignorance, someone else's fear, someone else's wound, and yet you carried it as law. The moment you see this, something inside you begins to reclaim freedom. Praise also becomes different after awareness. Instead of using praise as emotional fuel for the ego, you can receive it as a passing kindness. You can appreciate it without becoming dependent on it. You can let it warm you without needing it to define you. This is important because the addiction to praise can be just as unstable as the fear of criticism. Both keep attention trapped outside the self. Both make inner peace dependent on other people's reactions. Both strengthen the ego's hunger. The Buddhist way is not to reject praise or pretend criticism does not hurt. It is to meet both with awareness, to understand their impermanence, to stop turning them into identity, to return again and again to the quiet center beneath approval and disapproval. That quiet center is not arrogance. It is not saying nobody's opinion matters. It is saying opinions exist, but they are not the whole truth of me. This is a humble kind of freedom, because when you no longer live and die by praise and criticism, you can live more honestly. You can create without being paralyzed. You can speak without needing perfect approval. You can love without performing. You can grow without shame. You can be corrected without feeling destroyed. And perhaps most importantly, you can stop giving your inner peace to every passing voice. There will always be praise. There will always be criticism. There will always be someone who understands you and someone who does not. There will always be someone who sees your heart clearly and someone who judges from their own confusion. But you do not have to let every voice enter the deepest room of your being. Some words can be heard and released. Some feedback can be learned from and left behind. Some judgments can pass through your awareness like birds crossing the sky. The sky does not chase every bird. The sky does not become wounded by every cloud. It remains open. This is what Buddhist wisdom slowly teaches the heart. To become open but not defenseless, soft but not enslaved, receptive but not ruled by every opinion, humble enough to learn but grounded enough not to collapse. The reason criticism has felt permanent for so long is not because it truly is permanent. It is because the mind has rehearsed it as if it were sacred truth. But what has been rehearsed can be released. What has been believed can be questioned. What has been carried can be set down. Not all at once, not through force, but through repeated awareness. The next time praise comes, breathe and receive it, but do not cling. The next time criticism comes, breathe and examine it, but do not become it. The next time an old, painful word returns, breathe and remember that a memory is visiting. It is not your master. It is not your name. It is not the total truth of your life. And slowly, the ego's fixation on pain begins to weaken. The heart becomes less hungry for applause and less terrified of blame. The mind becomes less trapped in old sentences. The body begins to understand that discomfort is not the same as danger, and the part of you that once believed every criticism was proof of your unworthiness begins to see something gentler and truer. You were never meant to build your identity from the sharpest words spoken to you. You were never meant to carry careless judgment as permanent truth. You were never meant to let one painful voice erase all the quiet evidence of your goodness, effort, courage, and growth. Praise may come and go, criticism may come and go, but awareness can remain. And when awareness becomes stronger than the ego's hunger, you begin to live from a place that no insult can fully reach and no compliment needs to complete. And once the mind slowly loosens its attachment to praise and criticism, another hidden source of suffering becomes impossible to ignore. Many people are not only afraid of rejection, they are afraid of time itself, afraid they are too late, too slow, too unsuccessful, too lost compared to everyone else around them. The mind begins measuring life like a race, and every passing year starts feeling like evidence that something is wrong. This is how comparison quietly steals peace from millions of people. There is a silent panic many people carry that they rarely speak about honestly. It appears while scrolling through social media. It appears at family gatherings. It appears during birthdays. It appears late at night when the world becomes quiet enough for hidden fears to speak. The fear sounds something like this: I should be further ahead by now. Those 7 words have created enormous suffering in the modern world. Some people feel behind financially, others feel behind emotionally, some feel behind in love, marriage, healing, success, purpose, confidence, spirituality, or personal growth. Even people who appear successful often secretly feel late compared to someone else. This is because the mind has become trapped inside comparison and imagined timelines. The ego creates invisible deadlines for life, then punishes the person whenever reality does not match the fantasy. By this age, I should have achieved more. By this age, I should be healed. By this age, I should feel happier. By this age, I should know who I am. By this age, I should have figured everything out. And when life unfolds differently, shame appears. But Buddhist wisdom teaches something radical. The suffering is not coming from life itself. The suffering is coming from the mind's attachment to imagined timelines. Time becomes painful when the ego turns becoming into identity. The ego is obsessed with becoming more important, more successful, more admired, more secure, more complete. It constantly says, "Who I am right now is not enough. I must become something else before I can finally rest." This creates endless psychological tension because the mind is always leaning into the future while rejecting the present moment. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from this inability to fully arrive in the life that is already happening now. The mind keeps postponing peace. It says happiness exists somewhere ahead, somewhere later, somewhere after enough progress has been made. But later keeps moving. This is why even major achievements often fail to create lasting fulfillment. A person reaches the goal they once dreamed about, but instead of peace, another comparison appears immediately. Another timeline, another pressure, another feeling of insufficiency. The mind says, "Yes, but look how much further other people are." This is the trap of comparison. No matter where you stand, the ego can always find someone ahead of you. Someone richer, younger, wiser, more attractive, more successful, more disciplined, more healed, more loved, more accomplished. And because comparison has no ending, neither does dissatisfaction. Buddhist philosophy explains that the ego survives through separation. It constantly divides life into categories: better and worse, ahead and behind, worthy and unworthy, success and failure. Once the mind becomes trapped in these measurements, life stops feeling alive and starts feeling like competition. Even simple moments become poisoned by comparison. A friend shares good news, and part of the mind feels inadequate. Someone else gets married, and the mind questions your own timeline. Someone starts succeeding online, and suddenly your progress feels invisible. Someone younger achieves something impressive, and the ego panics about wasted time. This creates emotional exhaustion because the mind is no longer living life directly. It is constantly evaluating life through the lens of comparison. The Buddha understood that comparison creates suffering because it pulls awareness away from direct experience. Instead of simply living, the person becomes trapped inside mental measurement. They stop experiencing the present moment clearly because they are always checking where they stand compared to others. But here is the deeper problem. Comparison is built on incomplete information. You compare your full inner life to someone else's visible surface. You compare your pain, fears, insecurities, failures, and private struggles to another person's highlights. Naturally, you feel behind. You see someone's success, but not their loneliness. You see someone's confidence, but not their anxiety. You see someone's relationship, but not their emotional wounds. You see someone's achievements, but not the years of confusion behind them. This is why comparison creates illusion. The ego imagines other people's lives as complete stories based on fragments. Buddhist awareness cuts through this illusion by bringing attention back to reality instead of fantasy. What is actually happening right now? What is truly here in this moment? What thoughts are creating suffering? What expectations is the mind clinging to? Many people never ask where their timelines even came from. They simply inherited them from society, family, culture, social media, and fear. At some point, they unconsciously accepted a script about how life should unfold. Success by this age, marriage by this age, children by this age, healing by this age, financial security by this age, emotional maturity by this age. But life is not a factory assembly line. Human beings do not unfold in identical timing. Some people bloom early, others bloom after deep suffering. Some learn love young, others learn wisdom through heartbreak. Some find purpose quickly, others discover themselves after years of confusion. A tree does not panic because another tree grows taller, faster. A river does not feel ashamed because another river reaches the ocean sooner. Only the human ego turns life into a race. This is why Buddhism places enormous importance on presence. The present moment is the only place life actually exists. Yet many people barely experience it because their attention is trapped in imagined futures or painful comparisons. The mind says, "I will finally relax once I catch up." But catch up to what? Most people never stop long enough to ask that question honestly. Catch up to society's expectations, to other people's lives, to your younger fantasies, to the ideal self created by fear and comparison. The destination keeps changing because the ego itself is unstable. This is why becoming cannot create permanent peace. The moment one goal is reached, the ego immediately creates another future version that must be chased. It survives through incompleteness. Buddhism does not reject goals or growth. It rejects attachment to becoming as the source of worth. There is a major difference between taking meaningful action and psychologically postponing your right to exist peacefully until certain conditions are met. Many people live as if they are permanently almost enough, almost successful enough, almost healed enough, almost attractive enough, almost wise enough, almost ready enough. And because almost never ends, they spend years emotionally starving while waiting to arrive somewhere the ego itself keeps moving further away. One of the saddest consequences of feeling behind in life is that people stop seeing their own path clearly. Comparison blinds them to their actual growth. They become obsessed with what is missing while ignoring what has already survived, healed, learned, endured, and transformed. A person who once could barely get out of bed may now be rebuilding their life quietly, but comparison whispers, "You should still be further." A person who survived deep emotional pain may now be slowly learning peace, but comparison says, "Others are already happier." A person who spent years lost may finally be finding direction, but comparison says, "You wasted too much time." This is how the ego steals gratitude from the present. Buddhist teachings on impermanence also help dissolve the illusion of falling behind. Everything in life changes constantly. Success changes, failure changes, relationships change, bodies change, careers change, emotions change, identities change. The version of life you envy today may look completely different years from now. Yet the ego treats temporary conditions like permanent rankings. The Buddha saw clearly that attachment to status creates suffering because status itself is unstable. Today, someone appears ahead. Tomorrow, life changes everything. Illness, loss, heartbreak, aging, confusion, or transformation can completely alter a person's path. This does not mean life is meaningless. It means life is fluid. The ego craves fixed certainty. Reality does not provide it. One of the deepest forms of suffering happens when people confuse delayed outcomes with personal failure. Sometimes life unfolds slowly, not because you are broken, but because certain lessons require time. Some people need years to heal wounds others never carried. Some people spend years surviving before they can begin thriving. Some people lose themselves before they find deeper truth. There is wisdom that only suffering teaches. The person who feels behind may actually be developing emotional depth impossible to measure externally. Compassion, resilience, humility, self-awareness, spiritual maturity, patience, and emotional understanding often grow silently through painful experiences. But modern culture rarely values invisible growth. It values visible milestones, money, appearance, achievement, recognition, productivity. So people begin measuring themselves entirely through external timelines while ignoring inner transformation. Buddhist wisdom reverses this focus. It asks not, "How impressive is your life?" but "How awake are you within your life?" A person can appear successful externally while internally living in constant anxiety and emptiness. Another person may appear ordinary while quietly developing peace, awareness, compassion, and emotional freedom. Which one is truly ahead? The ego only recognizes visible achievement. Awareness recognizes inner liberation. This is why some people feel exhausted even when life looks fine on paper. They are chasing timelines that do not actually belong to their soul. They are living according to comparison instead of truth. When you constantly feel behind, rest becomes difficult because the mind treats relaxation like wasted time. Joy becomes difficult because enjoyment feels irresponsible while falling behind. Even small pleasures become contaminated by guilt. The nervous system stays tense because the ego experiences life as urgency. Hurry, catch up, do more, fix yourself faster, achieve more quickly, become someone soon. But awareness asks a different question. What if your life is not late? What if it is simply unfolding differently than the mind expected? This question softens enormous suffering, because often the deepest pain is not the current moment itself. The deepest pain is resistance to the current moment. The mind keeps arguing with reality. This should not be happening. I should already be somewhere else. My life should look different by now. But reality remains unchanged by inner resistance. Suffering increases because the ego fights what already exists. Acceptance does not mean giving up on growth. It means ending the war against the timing of your life. You stop treating your current season as evidence of failure. A winter season is not wrong because it does not look like spring. Some parts of life are for building. Some are for healing. Some are for grieving. Some are for learning. Some are for letting go. Some are for becoming quiet enough to finally hear yourself clearly. The ego wants every season to look productive externally. But Buddhist wisdom understands that invisible seasons matter too. Many people are secretly carrying exhaustion from trying to rush their becoming. They pressure themselves constantly because they believe their value depends on speed. But healing rushed by fear often becomes unstable. Growth forced by shame often collapses. Real transformation usually happens slowly, quietly, almost invisibly at first. The Buddha himself spent years searching before awakening. Many spiritual traditions describe wandering, confusion, failure, and uncertainty before deeper understanding emerges. Yet modern culture acts as though everyone should have complete clarity immediately. This creates unrealistic expectations that wound people psychologically, especially young people. Many now feel ancient at 25, lost at 30, hopeless at 40, invisible at 50, or irrelevant at 60 because society worships speed and external achievement. But Buddhist awareness sees how absurd this is. Human life cannot be reduced to timelines and comparisons. You are not a delayed product. You are not a failed project. You are not behind because your journey looks different. Some people awaken emotionally after years of numbness. Some learn self-worth after decades of shame. Some discover love after years of loneliness. Some find purpose after surviving darkness. Some only begin truly living after losing everything false. Life is not linear. This understanding creates compassion toward yourself. Instead of attacking your current stage, you begin listening to it. What is this season teaching me? What pain still needs healing? What illusion am I being asked to release? What attachments are creating suffering? These questions create wisdom instead of panic. One reason comparison becomes addictive is because it gives the ego a sense of orientation. Measuring yourself against others creates temporary identity. But identity built through comparison is unstable because someone else's life is always changing too. Today, you feel ahead. Tomorrow, you feel behind. Your self-worth rises and falls based on external movement. This is emotional imprisonment. Buddhist practice slowly frees the mind from this cycle by returning attention inward, not inward in a selfish way, but inward in an honest way. You stop obsessing over where you stand compared to everyone else and begin asking deeper questions. Am I living truthfully? Am I becoming more aware? Am I acting with compassion? Am I trapped in attachment? Am I abandoning myself? Am I awake to this moment? These questions matter more than comparison because they reconnect you with reality instead of illusion. One of the most healing realizations is understanding that no human being ever fully arrives. The ego imagines that somewhere there are people who have everything figured out permanently. But even successful people struggle. Even wise people feel uncertainty. Even confident people experience fear. Even spiritually mature people continue learning. Life is movement. Becoming never completely ends. Once you deeply understand this, much pressure begins dissolving. You stop expecting yourself to reach some perfect final version where all confusion disappears forever. Instead, you begin participating in life more gently. You allow yourself to learn gradually. You allow healing to unfold naturally. You allow uncertainty without turning it into shame. You allow your path to be human. This creates enormous emotional freedom because the mind no longer treats every delay as catastrophe. A flower opening slowly is not failing. The moon changing phases is not failing. The ocean moving with tides is not failing. Nature does not rush itself. Only the fearful ego believes worth depends on speed. Buddhist wisdom reconnects you to this deeper rhythm. It reminds you that peace does not come from outrunning time. Peace comes from stepping out of the illusion that your existence needs comparison to have meaning. You do not need to become someone else's timeline. You do not need to win against other people's lives. You do not need to race your own humanity. You only need to wake up enough to stop turning your path into punishment. And perhaps the saddest thing about constantly feeling behind is how much life gets missed while chasing imagined arrival. The sky changes colors every evening. Small moments of love appear quietly. Healing happens in ordinary conversations. Wisdom grows in unnoticed silence. The heart slowly transforms through experiences that comparison completely overlooks. But the ego cannot see these things because it is obsessed with measuring progress. Awareness sees differently. Awareness notices this breath, this step, this moment, this life already unfolding now, not someday, not after perfection, now. And when you truly begin living from that awareness, something inside you relaxes for the first time in years. The pressure to catch up softens. The urgency begins fading. The comparison loses some of its power. You stop treating yourself like a late version of somebody else. You begin meeting your own life directly. Not the fantasy, not the timeline, not the competition, your actual life. And maybe that is the real escape from the illusion of falling behind, not suddenly becoming more successful than everyone else, but finally realizing there was never a universal race to begin with. There were only human beings carrying different wounds, different lessons, different timing, and different paths, all trying to find peace while the ego kept whispering that they were too late. But awareness gently answers back. You are not late to your own life. You are only being asked to arrive in it fully now. And after slowly loosening the illusion of falling behind, another fear quietly rises underneath almost every human struggle. If you are not your success, not your achievements, not your appearance, not your reputation, not your role, then who are you? Beneath the pressure to become somebody important is often a deeper terror the ego rarely admits out loud. The fear of being nobody. The fear that without identity, recognition, or significance, there may be nothing valuable left to hold on to. This fear shapes far more of human life than most people realize. There is a strange emptiness many people carry that cannot be solved through achievement alone. They spend years building an identity, protecting an image, creating status, collecting labels, chasing recognition, trying to become someone important in the eyes of the world. But even after gaining success, praise, followers, admiration, or accomplishment, something still feels unstable underneath, because the deeper fear was never really about success. The deeper fear was disappearance, the fear of not mattering, the fear of being ordinary, the fear of becoming invisible in a world obsessed with significance. This is one of the reasons people cling so tightly to identity. Identity creates the feeling of solidity. It tells the ego, this is who you are. This is your place. This is your importance. Without identity, many people feel psychologically exposed, almost as if they are dissolving. Buddhism approaches this fear in a radically different way than most philosophies. Instead of strengthening the ego's identity, Buddhism gently examines it. It asks one of the most uncomfortable questions a human being can face. What exactly is this self you are trying so desperately to protect? At first, this question feels threatening because most people spend their entire lives constructing identity. They define themselves through work, appearance, relationships, intelligence, personality, beliefs, trauma, achievements, failures, nationality, status, opinions, spirituality, or social image. The ego creates a story and calls the story me. But Buddhist wisdom teaches that this fixed self is not as solid as it appears. This does not mean you do not exist. It means the identity you cling to is constantly changing, shifting, and being reconstructed moment by moment. Thoughts change, emotions change, roles change, desires change, beliefs change, the body changes, even memories change over time. Yet the ego keeps trying to freeze all this movement into one permanent identity. This creates suffering because life itself refuses to stay fixed. A person who built their identity around beauty suffers deeply when aging begins. A person who built identity around success suffers when failure appears. A person who built identity around intelligence suffers when uncertainty arrives. A person who built identity around relationships suffers when someone leaves. The stronger the attachment to identity, the stronger the fear when life inevitably changes. This is why many people secretly panic during transitions in life. Losing a job, ending a relationship, aging, moving, becoming a parent, experiencing illness, spiritual awakening, or emotional transformation can create deep anxiety because identity itself begins shifting. The ego feels threatened whenever old definitions collapse. Some people spend years desperately trying to preserve an old version of themselves long after life has already changed. They cling to outdated identities because uncertainty feels terrifying. But Buddhism teaches that freedom begins the moment you stop demanding permanence from something that was never permanent to begin with. The ego hears this and becomes afraid. If I let go of identity, will I disappear? If I stop defining myself, through achievement, who will I be? If I am not special, successful, admired, or important, do I still matter? These questions reveal how deeply the fear of being nobody controls human behavior. Many people are not chasing success because they genuinely love success. They are chasing emotional proof that they exist meaningfully. Recognition temporarily silences the fear of emptiness. Attention temporarily comforts insecurity. Status temporarily protects the ego from feeling invisible. But the relief never lasts long. Soon the ego needs another achievement, another validation, another reminder of importance. This creates endless psychological hunger because external identity can never fully stabilize inner insecurity. The Buddha understood this deeply. He saw that the ego keeps searching for permanent solidity in a world where everything changes. But instead of creating peace, this search creates attachment, fear, anxiety, comparison, and suffering. One of the most difficult truths for the ego to accept is that no identity can fully protect you from impermanence. Titles fade, bodies age, reputations change, popularity disappears, success fluctuates, roles shift. Even the image you have of yourself changes repeatedly throughout life. The ego experiences this instability as terrifying because it wants certainty. It wants something fixed to hold on to. But Buddhism gently reveals that the problem is not change itself. The problem is clinging. A hand gripping water tightly cannot hold it. The tighter the grip, the faster the suffering. Many people secretly live in fear of insignificance. They worry that if they stop achieving, producing, posting, performing, impressing, or proving themselves, nobody will care about them anymore. This fear becomes especially strong in cultures obsessed with visibility and productivity. People begin treating existence itself like performance. They constantly manage how they appear. They carefully shape public identity. They fear silence because silence removes external confirmation. They fear slowing down because achievement became emotional protection. They fear anonymity because anonymity feels like emotional death to the ego. This creates enormous exhaustion. The person becomes trapped inside maintaining a self-image. But maintaining identity requires constant effort because identity itself is unstable. This is why some people feel strangely empty after major accomplishments. The achievement briefly strengthens the ego, but soon the old insecurity returns because the deeper fear was never solved. The ego still fears becoming nobody. Buddhist teachings on emptiness are often misunderstood. Emptiness does not mean meaninglessness. It means that the self does not exist independently as a fixed, permanent entity. Everything is interconnected, changing, and dependent on conditions. At first, this idea can feel frightening because the ego wants solidity, but eventually something extraordinary begins happening. The fear of being nobody slowly transforms into freedom from needing to become somebody. This changes life completely. You no longer need every interaction to confirm your worth. You no longer need constant recognition to feel real. You no longer collapse whenever identity shifts. You no longer panic every time life changes direction, because you begin understanding that the self was never a fixed object to defend so desperately. This creates spaciousness inside the mind. Instead of constantly protecting identity, awareness begins observing experience more openly. Thoughts arise and pass. Emotions arise and pass. Roles arise and pass. Success arises and passes. Failure arises and passes. None of them fully define the totality of your existence. This realization softens enormous suffering. A person who strongly identifies with failure becomes trapped in shame. A person who strongly identifies with success becomes trapped in fear of losing it. A person who strongly identifies with image becomes trapped in performance. But awareness itself remains larger than these passing conditions. Many people are terrified of being ordinary because the ego believes ordinariness means worthlessness. Society reinforces this constantly. Be exceptional, be unique, be ahead, be admired, be unforgettable, be more, always more. But this endless pressure creates deep emotional loneliness because the person begins relating to life through constant self-measurement. Even spirituality can become ego performance. People become attached to being seen as awakened, wise, healed, disciplined, or enlightened. The ego can turn anything into identity if it believes identity creates safety. This is why Buddhism repeatedly emphasizes letting go. Not because identity itself is evil, but because attachment to identity creates suffering. The more tightly you cling to who you are supposed to be, the more painful life becomes whenever reality changes. A person deeply attached to being strong struggles terribly when vulnerability appears. A person attached to being good suffers intensely when they make mistakes. A person attached to being intelligent panics when they feel uncertain. A person attached to being spiritually evolved feels shame whenever human emotions return. The ego keeps trying to create a perfect self-image immune to pain, but no such image exists. This is why Buddhist freedom is not about becoming a perfect identity. It is about no longer needing identity to carry your entire worth. This creates incredible emotional flexibility. You can fail without becoming failure. You can feel sadness without becoming brokenness. You can experience confusion without becoming worthless. You can lose roles without losing existence itself. Many people have never experienced this freedom because they have spent their entire lives trying to solidify identity. They are always introducing themselves internally. I am successful. I am attractive. I am damaged. I am important. I am a failure. I am special. I am unlovable. These labels become psychological prisons because the ego repeats them constantly until they feel absolute. But Buddhism asks you to look more carefully. Who are you before the label appears? Who notices the thought, I am a failure? Who notices the fear, I am nobody? Awareness itself cannot be reduced to a single identity. This realization begins dissolving the ego's panic. You stop trying to freeze yourself into one permanent definition. You allow yourself to be human, changing, unfinished, evolving. This also changes relationships. When identity insecurity is strong, people often seek others to stabilize their sense of self. They need constant reassurance, validation, admiration, or attention because internally they feel uncertain about who they are. But when awareness deepens, relationships become less desperate. You stop asking other people to constantly confirm your existence. You stop needing to perform identity for love. You stop turning connection into emotional survival. Instead, relationships become spaces of presence rather than identity maintenance. This creates peace. Many people fear emptiness because they misunderstand it. They think emptiness means losing themselves completely. But Buddhist emptiness is not nihilism. It is openness. It is freedom from rigid identity. A rigid tree breaks in a storm. A flexible tree bends and survives. The ego wants rigidity. Awareness allows flexibility. This flexibility reduces suffering because life itself is movement. Every stage of life changes who you appear to be externally. Childhood disappears. Youth disappears. Careers shift. Relationships transform. Bodies age. Opinions evolve. Identity naturally moves. The person attached to fixed identity suffers constantly during these transitions. The person rooted in awareness moves more gently with change. One of the deepest fears hidden beneath identity insecurity is mortality itself. The ego fears being forgotten. Forgotten by people, forgotten by history, forgotten by the world. This fear quietly drives enormous amounts of human behavior. People want legacy because legacy promises symbolic permanence. They want recognition because recognition temporarily eases existential fear. They want significance because insignificance feels emotionally unbearable to the ego. But Buddhism teaches something profoundly calming. Your existence does not need cosmic importance to have value. A sunset does not need applause to be beautiful. A flower does not need recognition to bloom. A quiet act of kindness does not become meaningless simply because the world does not celebrate it. The ego constantly asks, will I be remembered? Awareness asks, can I be fully present? This changes the entire direction of life. Instead of chasing immortality through image, you begin touching life directly. The taste of tea, the feeling of breath, the warmth of connection, the stillness of silence, the beauty of simple existence. These ordinary moments become sacred once the obsession with becoming somebody begins loosening. Ironically, many people only begin feeling truly alive after they stop trying so desperately to become important. Because now energy is no longer trapped inside endless self-construction. You stop monitoring yourself constantly. You stop performing identity every second. You stop fearing every shift in life. You stop needing every person to validate your existence. And slowly, something quieter begins emerging. Not ego confidence, not superiority, not grand identity, just presence, simple presence. A. Peaceful awareness, no longer fighting constantly to prove existence. This is why Buddhist freedom can feel so strange at first. The ego expects freedom to feel like becoming extraordinary. But often, freedom feels ordinary, light, spacious, uncomplicated, like finally setting down heavy armor you forgot you were wearing. The fear of being nobody slowly dissolves because you realize nobody was ever required. Existence itself was enough before the ego began demanding specialness. This does not make life passive. You can still create, work, love, build, dream, and contribute. But now these actions arise from aliveness rather than desperate identity hunger. You no longer need achievement to prove existence. You no longer need superiority to feel worthy. You no longer need constant visibility to feel real. This creates deep peace because your worth is no longer attached to maintaining a psychological performance. The Buddha often emphasized that suffering comes from clinging. Identity insecurity is one of the deepest forms of clinging because the ego believes letting go means annihilation. But the opposite often happens. The more identity softens, the more alive life feels. Colors feel brighter. Moments feel deeper. Relationships feel more genuine. Silence feels less threatening. The present moment becomes accessible again because attention is no longer trapped in constant self-construction. There is enormous relief in no longer needing to be extraordinary every second to deserve existence. You can simply be human, tired sometimes, confused sometimes, joyful sometimes, afraid sometimes, peaceful sometimes, changing constantly, and still worthy of compassion. This understanding also softens judgment toward others. When you stop obsessively protecting identity, you stop needing constant comparison too. Other people's success becomes less threatening. Other people's opinions become less controlling. Other people's recognition becomes less necessary. The mind becomes less crowded, less defensive, less hungry. This is not because you stopped existing. It is because you stopped trying to force yourself into a permanent image. One of the deepest spiritual freedoms is realizing that awareness itself does not need applause. Awareness does not need titles. Awareness does not need to become the most admired person in the room. Awareness simply notices life unfolding. The ego fears this simplicity because simplicity cannot be controlled through status. But the heart often longs for it quietly, to stop pretending, to stop proving, to stop carrying the exhausting pressure of becoming somebody important enough to finally deserve peace. And perhaps that is the great transformation Buddhism offers, not the destruction of individuality, but liberation from the prison of identity insecurity. You stop asking, "Am I somebody important enough?" and begin asking, "Can I fully wake up to this moment without clinging?" That question changes everything, because the fear of being nobody was never truly solved through becoming more impressive. It softens through awareness, through presence, through realizing that the self you spent years desperately protecting was never fixed enough to carry permanent peace anyway. And when that realization settles deeply into the heart, something extraordinary begins happening. You stop running from emptiness. You discover spaciousness inside it. You stop fearing ordinariness. You discover freedom inside simplicity. You stop desperately trying to become someone unforgettable. You finally remember how to simply be. And in that quiet being, untouched by comparison, untouched by performance, untouched by the exhausting hunger for identity, you discover something the ego could never understand. You were never empty because you failed to become somebody. You only felt empty because you forgot the peace that exists before the mind starts demanding a permanent self to defend. And once the fear of being nobody begins to lose its power, another painful pattern becomes clearer. Some people do not chase achievement because they are truly free. They chase achievement because silence terrifies them. They are afraid that if they stop winning, producing, improving, proving, and becoming impressive, the old emptiness will return and whisper the truth they have been running from for years. Without all this, who would love me? There is a kind of success that looks beautiful from the outside, but feels heavy on the inside. People clap, praise, admire, respect, and celebrate it. But behind the polished surface, the person may feel strangely tired, lonely, and never fully satisfied. They achieve one goal, but peace does not stay. They reach one milestone, but the mind immediately creates another. They receive recognition, but deep down, they still feel like they are one mistake away from being exposed as not enough. This is the hidden suffering of the overachiever. The world often sees ambition, discipline, excellence, and strength. But Buddhism teaches us to look beneath appearances, because not every action that looks strong comes from inner freedom. Sometimes achievement comes from joy. Sometimes it comes from purpose. Sometimes it comes from love for learning, service, beauty, or contribution. But sometimes achievement comes from fear, fear of being ordinary, fear of being rejected, fear of disappointing people, fear of resting, fear of discovering that without success there is nothing solid inside. This is why many overachievers cannot enjoy what they accomplish. The mind treats every victory as temporary protection from shame. For a few moments the praise feels good. The result feels satisfying. The person feels safe. But soon the old hunger returns. The achievement that once felt important becomes normal. The mind asks, "What next?" And suddenly the person is running again. Buddhist wisdom sees this as craving, not simply craving for money, fame, or status, but craving for a stable identity through achievement. The ego says, "If I accomplish enough, I will finally become someone solid, someone worthy, someone safe." But the self built from achievement is unstable because achievement itself is unstable. Results change, praise fades, competition grows, bodies get tired, opportunities shift, the world moves on. So the overachiever lives under constant pressure to renew their worth again and again. This is not true peace, it is emotional labor disguised as success. Many overachievers learned early that love was tied to performance. Maybe they were praised most when they won. Maybe they were noticed only when they achieved. Maybe mistakes were treated harshly. Maybe their family placed heavy expectations on them. Maybe they became the responsible child, the gifted child, the strong child, the one who could not afford to fail. Slowly, the child began to believe that being loved and being impressive were connected. That belief may follow them for decades. Even as adults, they may not know how to separate who they are from what they produce. A good result makes them feel temporarily valuable. A bad result makes them feel personally defective. Rest feels uncomfortable because it removes the performance. Failure feels unbearable because it touches the old wound of conditional worth. This is why overachievement can become addictive. It gives short bursts of relief. Every accomplishment becomes proof that the person is still valuable. But like all forms of craving, the relief fades quickly. The mind needs another hit of validation, another success, another sign that they are not falling apart. The tragedy is that the overachiever may be admired by everyone except themselves. They may have evidence of talent, discipline, and courage all around them, yet inside they feel behind. They may inspire others while quietly feeling empty. They may be called strong while secretly feeling exhausted. They may appear confident while living with deep fear that stopping will reveal something shameful. Buddhism teaches that suffering grows when we identify with impermanent things. Achievement is impermanent, reputation is impermanent, youth is impermanent, productivity is impermanent, praise is impermanent. Even skill changes over time. If your entire worth rests on these things, then your peace will always feel threatened. This is why constant achievement cannot heal unworthiness. It can decorate the wound. It can distract from the wound. It can win applause around the wound. But it cannot dissolve the wound if the deeper belief remains untouched. The belief says, "I must earn my right to feel enough." Until that belief is seen clearly, no amount of success will feel like home. Many overachievers live with an invisible scoreboard inside their minds. Every day is measured. Did I do enough? Did I improve enough? Did I make progress? Did I waste time? Did I fall behind? Did I impress others? Did I prove myself? Even moments of rest are not truly restful because the scoreboard keeps running. The body may be lying down, but the mind is still working. This is one reason overachievers often struggle with peace. Peace feels unfamiliar because their nervous system is trained for pressure. Calmness feels like laziness. Stillness feels like danger. Joy feels unproductive unless it leads to something useful. But a life where everything must be useful becomes emotionally dry. The soul needs moments that do not exist for achievement. Quiet mornings, honest conversations, slow walks, laughter without performance, rest without guilt, creativity without pressure, love without proving. These moments remind a person that life is not only a ladder to climb, it is also a field to enter with presence. But the overachieving mind often resists this. It says, "There is no time." It says, "You can rest later." It says, "You are not safe yet." It says, "You have not done enough to deserve peace." And later never arrives. Buddhist practice gently interrupts this cycle by returning awareness to the present moment. It does not ask the person to stop caring about excellence. It asks them to notice the suffering beneath the chase. Are you acting from wisdom or fear? Are you building from love or running from shame? Are you serving life or trying to outrun emptiness? These questions are not comfortable, but they are freeing. Because sometimes the overachiever does not need more discipline, they need more honesty. They need to ask why success feels so urgent, why failure feels so personal, why rest feels like guilt, why being average for one day feels unbearable, why a small mistake can ruin their sense of self, why praise never stays long enough to calm the heart. Buddhism teaches that awareness is the beginning of liberation. Not blame, not punishment, awareness. When you see the machinery of craving clearly, you no longer have to obey it blindly. You may notice that the desire to achieve is sometimes clean and peaceful. It may arise from love, creativity, service, responsibility, or genuine purpose. That kind of effort feels alive. It may be difficult, but it does not destroy the heart. But the desire to achieve may also arise from panic, from comparison, from the need to prove someone wrong, from fear of being ignored, from shame about the past, from the old belief that ordinary existence is not enough. That kind of effort drains the soul, even when it produces impressive results. Two people can work hard and look similar from the outside, but their inner worlds may be completely different. One is moved by purpose, the other is chased by fear. One can rest after effort, the other cannot stop. One enjoys growth, the other uses growth as punishment. One builds a life, the other builds armor. This difference matters deeply. The Buddha's teaching on the middle way is important here. The middle way does not mean having no ambition. It means not living in extremes. Overachievement often becomes an extreme because the person swings far away from stillness, softness, and self-acceptance. Their identity becomes overly attached to output. But humans are not machines. A machine may be valued only by performance. A human being has dignity beyond performance. When overachievers forget this, they begin treating themselves like tools. They ask, "What can I produce? How much can I handle? How far can I push?" But they rarely ask, "Am I peaceful? Am I whole? Am I kind to myself? Am I present for my life?" This creates a painful imbalance. A person may become highly functional but emotionally disconnected. They may know how to succeed but not how to feel. They may know how to lead but not how to rest. They may know how to impress others but not how to receive tenderness. This is why some overachievers feel lonely even when surrounded by admiration. People relate to their image, not their vulnerability. They are praised for strength, so they keep hiding pain. They are rewarded for competence, so they keep suppressing need. They become trapped inside the role of the capable one. And the capable one often suffers quietly. Because if everyone expects you to be strong, where do you go when you are tired? If everyone praises your success, who notices your fear? If everyone admires your discipline, who asks whether you are hurting? Many overachievers become strangers to their own softness. They do not know how to ask for help without feeling weak. They do not know how to admit confusion without shame. They do not know how to slow down without feeling like they are losing identity. Buddhist compassion invites them to return to the parts of themselves they abandoned in the pursuit of excellence. The tired part, the frightened part, the playful part, the imperfect part, the part that wants to be loved without being impressive. This return can feel emotional because the overachiever often carries years of self-neglect. They may realize they have been successful in the world, but absent from themselves. They may have built an outer life while ignoring the inner child, still waiting to hear, "You do not have to earn love by being exceptional." That sentence alone can feel like medicine, because many high-performing people were never given permission to simply be. They were trained to become, to improve, to deliver, to exceed, to stay ahead, to make people proud. And while growth is valuable, constant becoming, without self-acceptance becomes suffering. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that the present moment is not a mistake. The person you are now is not merely a stepping stone to a better version. This breath matters. This body matters. This stage of life matters. If you spend every moment using the present only to chase the future, you never actually live. Overachievement often steals life in this way. It convinces people they are building a future while quietly removing their ability to experience now. They postpone joy, postpone rest, postpone intimacy, postpone gratitude, postpone peace. They tell themselves, "After this next goal, I will slow down." But the next goal becomes another doorway to the next one. The chain continues. This is the nature of craving. It does not end by being fed. It ends by being understood. The overachiever may believe the solution is bigger success, but Buddhism suggests the deeper solution is freedom from the belief that success can finally complete the self. Completion cannot be found in an external result because the sense of incompleteness is a mental construction. It is maintained by craving, comparison, attachment, and self-image. When awareness sees this clearly, the chase begins to loosen. The person may still achieve, they may still work hard, they may still build beautiful things, but achievement no longer carries the impossible burden of proving worth. Work becomes expression, not identity. Success becomes a result, not salvation. Failure becomes information, not personal destruction. This is a profound shift, because when failure is no longer treated as proof of unworthiness, the nervous system relaxes, creativity becomes freer, learning becomes easier, relationships become more honest. The person becomes less defensive because their entire identity is no longer attached to being impressive. They can finally breathe. One of the great hidden costs of overachievement is fear of being truly known. If people admire the image, the overachiever may fear revealing the human beneath it. What if people see the insecurity? What if they see the exhaustion? What if they see the doubt? What if they realize the successful person still feels afraid? So the image becomes a prison. Buddhist teachings on non-self-help soften this prison. If the successful identity is not the whole of you, then it does not need constant defense. If the insecure identity is not the whole of you, then it does not need to define you either. Both are passing experiences within awareness. You can experience ambition without becoming ambition. You can experience fear without becoming fear. You can experience success without becoming success. You can experience failure without becoming failure. This creates inner space, and inside that space, you begin relating to yourself with more tenderness. The overachiever's healing often begins with small acts of non-performance, doing something without turning it into a measure of worth, resting without earning it first, creating something imperfectly, saying no, asking for help, allowing someone to see tiredness, celebrating progress without immediately demanding more. These small acts may seem simple, but for the overachieving mind, they can feel radical, because they challenge the old belief that worth must be constantly produced. Buddhist mindfulness helps by making the person aware of the body's signals. Overachievers often live in the head, plans, goals, strategies, outcomes, comparisons, but the body carries the truth. Tight shoulders, shallow breath, heavy eyes, restless stomach, fatigue ignored for too long. The body often knows the cost of achievement before the mind admits it. When awareness returns to the body, the person begins hearing the wisdom they have been overriding. They realize exhaustion is not weakness, it is communication. Anxiety is not an enemy, it is a signal. Emptiness is not failure, it is an invitation to stop using achievement as a substitute for self-connection. This is where true healing becomes possible, not by destroying ambition, but by purifying it. Ambition purified by awareness becomes purpose. Ambition driven by shame becomes bondage. Purpose feels grounded. Shame feels frantic. Purpose can pause. Shame cannot. Purpose includes the whole person. Shame sacrifices the person for the result. Many overachievers need to ask themselves, would I still want this goal if nobody praised me for it? Would I still choose this path if it did not make me look impressive? Is this dream truly mine, or is it a way to prove I am not worthless? These questions can be uncomfortable, but they lead to freedom, because some goals are not truly desires. They are wounds wearing ambition's clothing. A person may chase wealth, not because they love creating value, but because poverty once made them feel powerless. A person may chase fame, not because they love expression, but because invisibility once hurt deeply. A person may chase perfection, not because they love excellence, but because mistakes once brought shame. When you understand the wound behind the goal, you gain choice. You can still pursue the goal, but now with awareness. You no longer unconsciously expect it to heal everything. You no longer place your inner child's entire safety inside an external achievement. That is wisdom. Buddhism does not ask you to abandon worldly life. It asks you to stop sleeping through it, to stop mistaking craving for destiny, to stop mistaking applause for love, to stop mistaking productivity for worth. When the overachiever begins waking up, they may feel grief. Grief for the years spent running, grief for the softness they ignored, grief for the relationships neglected, grief for the joy postponed, grief for the younger self who believed being loved required endless excellence. This grief is not bad. It is part of returning. It means the heart is becoming honest again. And after grief, there can be relief. Relief that you do not have to keep proving forever. Relief that failure does not erase your humanity. Relief that rest is not betrayal. Relief that ordinary moments are not wasted. Relief that you can still grow without hating who you are now. This is the beginning of peaceful achievement. A life where effort remains but desperation fades. A life where discipline exists but cruelty ends. A life where goals matter but they no longer define the soul. A life where you can work deeply, love honestly, rest fully, and return to yourself without shame. The hidden suffering beneath constant achievement begins dissolving when the person finally sees that they were never chasing only success. They were chasing permission to feel enough. And that permission cannot come from the next goal, because the next goal can only give temporary satisfaction. The deeper permission must come from awareness, from compassion, from the quiet recognition that your worth was present before you achieved anything and will remain even when you achieve nothing for a while. This is not a message against effort. It is a message against self-abandonment disguised as effort, because the world may reward your exhaustion, but your soul knows the difference between being alive and merely being productive. And when you finally stop using achievement to escape unworthiness, something beautiful happens. You may still build, you may still succeed, you may still become excellent, but now success is no longer a mask over pain. It becomes an offering from a freer heart. You are no longer running from the fear of being nobody. You are no longer begging achievement to make you real. You are no longer sacrificing peace to keep an image alive. You are simply living, creating, learning, contributing, and growing from a place that does not need applause to breathe. And that is when achievement becomes lighter, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped carrying the impossible burden of proving that you deserve to exist. And when the endless pressure to achieve finally begins to loosen, another sorrow often rises quietly from underneath it. Beneath the exhaustion, beneath the striving, beneath the fear of failure, there is sometimes a painful grief that many people carry in silence. The grief of looking at their life and feeling that somewhere along the way, they betrayed the person they once promised themselves they would become. This kind of shame rarely speaks loudly, but it changes how people see themselves. There is a specific pain that comes from remembering old dreams, not because the dreams were foolish, but because the person looking back no longer recognizes themselves in them. At some point in life, many people carried a vision of who they thought they would become: stronger, braver, happier, more disciplined, more successful, more healed, more alive. They imagined a future version of themselves who would finally overcome fear, fulfill potential, and become everything they secretly hoped for. But life happened, pain happened, fear happened, confusion happened, exhaustion happened, loss happened, and slowly, without fully noticing it, many people drifted away from the person they thought they would become. This creates a very quiet form of heartbreak because the disappointment is deeply personal. It is not only disappointment from others, it is disappointment in yourself. The mind begins replaying old promises. I said I would do more with my life. I thought I would be further ahead. I promised I would heal by now. I used to believe in myself. I wasted too much time. I became someone smaller than I dreamed. These thoughts create heavy shame because the ego turns unmet expectations into identity. Instead of seeing life as complex and changing, the mind creates a harsh conclusion: I failed myself. Buddhist wisdom approaches this suffering with deep compassion because it understands something important. The person who made those promises years ago was not living with the knowledge, wounds, fears, limitations, and experiences you carry now. Human beings often judge their current self using expectations created by an earlier version of themselves who did not yet understand how difficult life could become. This creates impossible standards. A teenager promises greatness without understanding grief. A young adult imagines certainty without understanding heartbreak. A wounded person expects healing without understanding trauma. A struggling mind expects discipline without understanding emotional exhaustion. The ego creates a fantasy path, then later uses reality as evidence of failure. But Buddhism teaches that suffering increases whenever the mind refuses to see life clearly as it truly is. Many people carry regret because they are comparing their real human journey to an imagined version of life that never had to encounter suffering. They compare themselves to a fantasy self who never became depressed, never got hurt, never became afraid, never lost direction, never made mistakes, never became exhausted. Naturally, reality feels disappointing beside fantasy, but fantasy has never had to survive real life. This is why self-compassion matters so deeply. The version of you who struggled was not weak. That version was trying to survive with the awareness available at the time. Yet many people look back at old mistakes with cruelty instead of understanding. They replay old decisions endlessly. They attack themselves for opportunities missed. They punish themselves for not becoming successful sooner. They feel ashamed for becoming lost, distracted, emotionally overwhelmed, or uncertain. Over time, regret becomes identity. Instead of saying, I made mistakes, the person begins feeling, I ruined my life. This is where suffering deepens. Buddhism teaches that attachment to the past creates enormous pain because the mind keeps trying to mentally rewrite what has already happened. But reality does not change through self-punishment. The past remains the past, whether you attack yourself for it or not. Still, the ego believes guilt can somehow undo pain, so the mind keeps replaying memories. If only I had tried harder. If only I made better choices. If only I started earlier. If only I had not wasted those years. If only I had become who I was supposed to be. These thoughts feel productive because the ego believes endless self-judgment protects against future failure. But in reality, chronic regret often creates paralysis. A person becomes so ashamed of past mistakes that they stop trusting themselves in the present. This is one reason many people secretly feel emotionally frozen. They are not only afraid of future failure, they are still emotionally trapped inside old disappointment. Buddhist awareness invites you to look at regret differently, not as proof that you are defective, but as evidence that you are human. Human beings learn through confusion, attachment, pain, ignorance, desire, fear, and imperfection. Growth is rarely clean. Transformation is rarely linear. The Buddha himself taught that ignorance is part of the human condition. People act without full awareness all the time. Sometimes they realize truth only after suffering deeply. This realization should create humility and compassion, not endless hatred toward yourself. But many people secretly believe they do not deserve compassion because they failed their own expectations. This is why regret can become spiritually heavy. It is not only sadness about the past, it becomes a judgment about worthiness itself. The mind says, if I had become better, maybe I would deserve peace. Yet Buddhism teaches that peace cannot grow inside constant self-condemnation. A mind trapped in shame cannot clearly see the present moment because it is always emotionally kneeling before the past. Many people are grieving versions of themselves that never came into existence. They mourn the artist they never became, the relationship they never built, the confidence they never found, the courage they never acted on, the opportunities they missed, the years they lost to fear, anxiety, addiction, people-pleasing, or emotional survival. This grief is real. It deserves acknowledgement. But Buddhism gently asks a deeper question. Is your suffering coming from the actual present moment or from attachment to a version of life you thought should have happened? This question changes everything. Because often the present moment itself is not unbearable. What hurts is comparison between reality and fantasy. The ego keeps saying, "This should not have been my life." And because of that resistance, the person cannot fully meet the life still unfolding now. Regret becomes especially painful when people believe they wasted time. Time carries enormous emotional weight because humans treat time morally. A productive year feels virtuous. A confused year feels shameful. But life is more mysterious than that. Some years that look wasted externally may have been survival years internally. Some years spent lost may have been teaching hidden wisdom. Some years spent struggling may have been building emotional depth impossible to measure from the outside. The ego values visible progress. Awareness values awakening. A person may spend years appearing behind while slowly learning compassion, humility, resilience, emotional honesty, or spiritual understanding. These lessons rarely look impressive externally, but they transform the soul deeply. Still, the mind often resists this understanding because it wants certainty. It wants a neat story where effort guarantees success and pain always leads somewhere meaningful. But life is not always neat. Some suffering feels unfair. Some seasons feel confusing. Some dreams truly do collapse. Buddhism does not deny this reality. Instead, it teaches that clinging to how life should have unfolded creates additional suffering on top of pain itself. There is pain in loss. Then there is the extra suffering created by endless resistance. The ego says, "This should never have happened." Awareness says, "This is painful, but it is already part of reality now." That shift does not erase grief, but it softens the war against reality. One of the deepest forms of healing happens when people stop viewing their younger self through the eyes of punishment. Many people mentally revisit old versions of themselves only to criticize them. "You were foolish. You ruined everything. You wasted your potential. You should have known better." But Buddhist compassion asks you to see that younger self more honestly. That person was afraid. That person was wounded. That person was searching for love, meaning, safety, identity, or escape. That person was trying to survive emotionally with limited awareness. This does not excuse harmful choices, but it creates understanding instead of hatred. Without compassion, regret becomes emotional imprisonment. With compassion, regret becomes wisdom. This difference matters deeply. Wisdom learns from the past. Shame lives inside the past. Many people secretly carry enormous shame about becoming less than what they promised themselves because they attached identity to potential. Potential becomes emotionally dangerous when it turns into pressure. You could have been extraordinary. You had so much promise. You were meant for more. At first, these statements may sound encouraging, but over time they can create crushing psychological weight. The person begins feeling that ordinary humanity is failure. Every imperfect season feels like betrayal of potential. This is especially painful for gifted, sensitive, or highly self-aware people. They often imagine intense futures for themselves early in life. Then adulthood confronts them with limitation, emotional complexity, fear, and uncertainty. The gap between fantasy and reality becomes emotionally devastating. But Buddhism teaches that attachment to identity creates suffering, including attachment to imagined future identities. The person you should have become is still a mental construction, a fantasy self, a possibility imagined by the ego. Clinging to that image prevents full relationship with the person actually here now. And the person here now still deserves love, still deserves compassion, still deserves presence. Many people postpone self-acceptance until they become who they once promised they would be. But the years keep passing while the inner war continues. I cannot forgive myself yet. I have not earned peace yet. I still need to fix my life first. This creates endless emotional delay. Buddhism gently interrupts this cycle by returning attention to awareness itself. The present moment is not asking you to become your perfect fantasy before breathing fully. Life is still unfolding now, even after mistakes, even after detours, even after regret. This does not mean abandoning responsibility. If harm was done, repair matters. If growth is needed, effort matters. Buddhism does not encourage denial. It encourages awakening from unconscious suffering. Sometimes regret becomes unconscious identity. The person becomes attached to disappointment because disappointment feels familiar. They replay failure repeatedly because the ego believes carrying pain proves seriousness. Letting go almost feels disrespectful to the past. But self-punishment does not honor your younger self. Healing honors them. Learning honors them. Growing honors them. Living honestly now honors them. There is also deep suffering in believing your life story is already finished. Some people secretly act as though they missed their chance permanently. They stop dreaming, stop trying, stop trusting life, stop believing change is possible. Regret becomes a fixed identity, but Buddhism teaches impermanence. Everything changes constantly. Identity changes, circumstances change, awareness changes. Human beings can awaken at unexpected moments in life. Some people discover purpose at 40, some discover peace at 60, some learn self-love after decades of shame, some only begin truly living after losing everything false. Life does not move according to the ego's rigid timelines. This understanding creates hope without fantasy, not shallow optimism, but openness. The future is not fixed simply because the past contains pain. Many people fear they ruined their life permanently because they made mistakes during periods of unconsciousness. But unconsciousness itself can change. Awareness transforms action. A person trapped in fear for years can become courageous later. A person trapped in shame can become compassionate later. A person trapped in confusion can become wise later. The Buddha himself emphasized awakening, not perfection. Awakening means becoming conscious of suffering instead of remaining trapped inside it unconsciously. This changes your relationship with regret. Instead of asking, "Why was I not perfect sooner?" you begin asking, "What can this pain teach me now?" That question transforms suffering into wisdom, because regret often contains hidden longing to reconnect with neglected parts of yourself, longing to live more truthfully, longing to stop betraying your deeper values, longing to finally become emotionally honest. The pain itself may be pointing toward healing. Many people also carry shame because they compare their present life to earlier expectations created before trauma, grief, depression, heartbreak, anxiety, illness, or emotional exhaustion entered the picture. They judge themselves without accounting for what they survived. This creates unfair self-perception. A person who survived emotional collapse may still judge themselves for lost productivity. A person healing from trauma may judge themselves for not progressing faster. A person carrying deep loneliness may judge themselves for not becoming more successful. The ego often ignores emotional reality completely while measuring performance. But Buddhist compassion sees the whole person, not only outcomes. Not only productivity, not only visible success, the whole human experience. This changes how you relate to yourself internally. Instead of treating your life like a failed project, you begin seeing it as a human journey filled with confusion, learning, attachment, fear, growth, loss, and awakening. This does not erase accountability, it simply removes cruelty, and cruelty never creates true healing. One reason regret feels so heavy is because humans crave coherence. We want our life story to make sense. We want to believe our suffering had meaning. When life unfolds differently than expected, the ego struggles deeply because the narrative breaks. I thought I would become this. I thought life would look different. I thought I would be happier by now. The collapse of imagined identity creates grief similar to loss itself. Buddhism helps by loosening attachment to fixed narratives. You are not required to fully understand your entire life immediately. Human existence is more fluid than the ego wants to admit. Sometimes clarity arrives years later. Sometimes suffering changes direction unexpectedly. Sometimes what felt like failure becomes transformation later. Sometimes what felt like wasted time becomes emotional preparation. This does not mean every painful thing happens for a magical reason. Buddhism is not naive optimism, but it does teach that rigid attachment to one expected life path creates unnecessary suffering. Awareness allows flexibility. You begin understanding that being human means changing repeatedly. The self who made the original promises no longer exists exactly as they once did. New experiences, wounds, insights, losses, and awakenings have changed you. Holding your current self hostage to old fantasies prevents honest relationship with the person you are now. And the person you are now still deserves a future. That realization matters deeply because many people trapped in self-disappointment stop fully participating in life. Shame convinces them they already failed too much to begin again. But every moment awareness returns, life is still available. The present moment does not ask whether you perfectly fulfilled every youthful dream before allowing you to breathe. Existence itself continues. The sun still rises. The body still breathes. Awareness still notices. Possibility still exists. Buddhism teaches that awakening happens through presence, not through becoming the ideal self from the past. This means your healing does not depend on perfectly repairing every regret before peace becomes possible. Peace becomes possible when resistance softens, when self-hatred softens, when comparison softens, when attachment to old identity softens. This creates room for mercy. Mercy toward the frightened younger self who tried so hard. Mercy toward the exhausted self who lost direction. Mercy toward the grieving self who could not carry every expectation forever. Mercy toward the imperfect human being beneath all the pressure. And perhaps this is the deeper truth hidden beneath regret. The person you promised yourself you would become was often built from innocence, fantasy, pressure, fear, hope, and incomplete understanding. But the person you are becoming now through awareness may be more real, compassionate, humble, and awake than the fantasy ever was. The ego mourns lost perfection. Awareness discovers humanity, and humanity, though imperfect, contains wisdom deeper than performance. One day, many people realized something surprising. They spent years punishing themselves for not becoming an idealized version of success, while completely overlooking the courage it took simply to survive emotionally. Surviving heartbreak took courage. Surviving confusion took courage. Surviving loneliness took courage. Surviving disappointment took courage. Continuing after failure took courage. Trying again after shame took courage. Staying alive during dark seasons took courage. The ego rarely celebrates these things because they do not look glamorous, but awareness sees their truth clearly. This realization softens self-disappointment profoundly. You begin seeing that your life was not merely a failed attempt at perfection. It was a human journey, unfolding through uncertainty, messy, painful, beautiful, incomplete, real. And perhaps the deepest healing begins when you stop asking, "Why did I not become exactly who I promised I would be?" and begin asking something gentler instead. Who am I becoming now if I stop relating to myself through shame? That question opens the door to freedom, because the future has not disappeared simply because the past contains regret. Awareness still exists now. Choice still exists now. Compassion still exists now. Life still exists now. And the person sitting here reading these words is not beyond redemption simply because they became human instead of perfect. And when the shame of not becoming who you once promised yourself begins to soften, another painful truth slowly reveals itself underneath. Much of the suffering people carry does not come only from failure, regret, or disappointment. It comes from spending years searching outside themselves for permission to feel worthy inside. The mind begins depending on approval the way a thirsty person depends on water, and without realizing it, inner peace becomes controlled by the reactions of other people. This is how validation quietly becomes emotional addiction. There is a deep exhaustion that comes from constantly checking whether you are enough through the eyes of other people. Some people do it openly, others do it silently. But countless human beings wake up every day, emotionally scanning the world for confirmation. Did they like me? Did I impress them? Did I say the right thing? Do they approve of me? Do I still matter to them? Am I being noticed? Am I respected? Am I desirable? Am I successful enough now? The mind keeps searching for reassurance because somewhere deep inside it believes worth must be confirmed externally before it can feel real internally. At first, validation feels comforting. Praise creates warmth. Attention creates excitement. Approval creates relief. Compliments temporarily quiet insecurity. Recognition temporarily calms fear. The person feels seen for a moment, valued for a moment, important for a moment, but only for a moment. Soon the feeling fades. Then the mind starts searching again. This is why craving validation slowly destroys inner peace. Peace cannot survive where self-worth depends entirely on unstable external reactions. Human opinions constantly change. Attention changes, approval changes, popularity changes, attraction changes, praise changes. If your emotional stability depends on these things, remaining permanent, anxiety becomes inevitable. Buddhism teaches that attachment creates suffering because the mind clings to temporary experiences and demands permanence from them. Validation is one of the most addictive temporary experiences humans chase. The ego believes external approval will finally solve internal insecurity. But approval cannot permanently heal a wound rooted in disconnection from yourself. This is why even highly admired people often remain deeply insecure. They may receive endless praise, yet still feel emotionally fragile. One criticism can ruin their day. One rejection can collapse their confidence. One moment of being ignored can create panic, because the deeper issue was never solved. The issue was dependence itself. A person dependent on validation becomes emotionally controlled by the world around them. Their mood rises and falls based on reactions, attention, messages, praise, likes, responses, approval, and recognition. They may appear functional externally while internally living in constant emotional negotiation with other people's opinions. This creates enormous psychological tension. The person can no longer simply exist naturally. Every interaction becomes loaded with emotional survival. Even small social moments feel dangerous because the ego constantly asks, "What does this mean about me?" Someone responds coldly, and insecurity awakens. Someone else gets more attention, and comparison begins. Someone disagrees and self-doubt appears. Someone withdraws affection and panic rises. Life becomes emotionally unstable because the sense of self has no inner foundation. It depends entirely on external reflection. Buddhism compares this kind of attachment to trying to hold water in your hands tightly. The tighter you grip, the more fear appears. Validation never creates lasting safety because it was never permanent to begin with. Many people learned this dependency very early in life. As children, approval may have been connected to emotional survival. Praise meant safety. Attention meant connection. Validation meant love. Some children were only noticed when they achieved something. Others learned to become agreeable, entertaining, intelligent, attractive, successful, or emotionally useful because these behaviors earned approval. Slowly, the child begins shaping identity around reactions. I am lovable when people approve of me. I matter when I impress others. I deserve attention when I perform well. These beliefs often remain hidden deep beneath adult behavior. Later in life, the person may become obsessed with success, beauty, intelligence, social status, relationships, or public image, without realizing they are still emotionally chasing the same thing they once chased as a child: confirmation of worth. This creates profound suffering because the ego can never receive enough validation to permanently feel secure. Even when praise arrives, fear remains underneath it. What if they stop admiring me? What if I disappoint them? What if someone better appears? What if I lose what makes me valuable? The attachment itself creates anxiety. This is why some people become exhausted after social interactions. They are not simply talking, they are performing emotional self-protection constantly, monitoring reactions, adjusting personality, seeking reassurance, avoiding disapproval, trying to maintain approval. It becomes emotionally draining because the nervous system never fully relaxes. The person may not even know who they are anymore beneath all the adaptation. Buddhist wisdom teaches that this suffering comes from identification with the ego self. The ego constantly seeks confirmation because it feels incomplete internally. It builds identity from reflection. It says, "Tell me who I am. Tell me I matter. Tell me I am enough." But external voices can never permanently answer internal insecurity. This is why validation feels temporary no matter how much you receive. A compliment fades, applause fades, attention fades, recognition fades. The ego always returns hungry again. Craving validation also changes relationships in painful ways. Instead of connection becoming a place of presence, it becomes a place of emotional bargaining. The person unconsciously asks, "What do I need to do so you keep choosing me?" This creates people-pleasing, over-explaining, emotional shape-shifting, fear of boundaries, and fear of disagreement. Authenticity becomes difficult because the person is constantly managing perception. They become addicted to being liked. But being liked by everyone often requires abandoning parts of yourself. This is why many validation-seeking people secretly feel unseen. Other people may like the version they perform, but deep down, the person knows they are hiding important parts of themselves to maintain approval. This creates loneliness even inside relationships. The tragedy is that the more a person depends on validation, the less free they become emotionally. Their behavior becomes controlled by reactions. Their choices become controlled by acceptance. Their identity becomes controlled by external reflection. The Buddha saw clearly that attachment always creates fear. If your peace depends on being admired, then criticism becomes terrifying. If your peace depends on attention, then being ignored becomes painful. If your peace depends on approval, then disagreement feels dangerous. This is why inner peace disappears. The mind becomes restless because it is always reaching outward for stability. But external stability does not exist permanently. Human opinions shift constantly. Someone who praises you today may criticize you tomorrow. Someone who notices you today may ignore you later. Someone who admires you now may lose interest later. If your self-worth rises and falls with these changes, suffering becomes unavoidable. Many people trapped in validation-seeking behavior do not realize how deeply fear controls them. They may believe they simply care about relationships or success, but underneath is often terror of rejection, invisibility, insignificance, or abandonment. The ego says, if people stop approving of me, I will disappear emotionally. This fear becomes especially strong in the modern world because social media intensifies comparison and external measurement constantly. People begin treating attention like proof of existence. Visibility becomes emotional currency. Numbers begin shaping self-worth. A post gets attention and the nervous system feels rewarded. A post gets ignored and insecurity appears. Someone else receives more admiration and the ego feels threatened. This cycle creates enormous emotional instability because identity becomes dependent on digital reflection. Buddhist awareness interrupts this cycle by bringing attention back inward. Not inward in a narcissistic way, but inward in an honest way. What happens inside you when approval disappears? What fear rises when someone dislikes you? Why does disagreement feel threatening? Why does being ignored hurt so deeply? What part of you believes validation equals worth? These questions matter because awareness reveals the hidden attachment underneath behavior. Without awareness, people chase validation unconsciously for years, while wondering why peace never stays. The deeper problem is not wanting love or appreciation. Human connection matters. Appreciation feels good naturally. The problem begins when external confirmation becomes the foundation of identity itself. Then life becomes emotional dependency. This is why some people cannot tolerate silence. Silence removes external reassurance. Without distraction or validation, unresolved insecurity begins speaking loudly. The person may suddenly feel restless, empty, uncertain, or anxious because their nervous system became accustomed to constant external feedback. This is also why some people stay in unhealthy relationships far too long. The relationship may be painful, but losing validation feels even more frightening. The person fears the collapse of identity more than the suffering itself. Buddhism teaches that freedom begins when awareness no longer depends entirely on external conditions to remain peaceful. This does not mean becoming emotionally cold or isolated. It means developing an inner relationship with yourself that remains steady even when approval changes. This is difficult because many people were never taught how to internally validate themselves compassionately. They learned how to judge themselves, criticize themselves, compare themselves, and perform for others. But they never learned how to sit quietly with themselves without needing external proof of worth. So they spend years emotionally hungry. Validation becomes like emotional sugar, brief relief followed by another craving. One of the deepest forms of healing happens when a person begins separating love from performance. They begin realizing they do not need to constantly earn their right to exist peacefully. This realization changes relationships profoundly. The person becomes less desperate, less performative, less afraid of disagreement, less terrified of disappointing others, less emotionally controlled by praise because their identity is no longer entirely externalized. Buddhist mindfulness helps create this freedom slowly. You begin noticing validation cravings as they arise, the urge to check reactions, the urge to impress, the urge to explain yourself excessively, the urge to seek reassurance repeatedly, the urge to shape-shift for approval. Instead of automatically obeying these impulses, awareness simply notices them. This pause matters enormously, because in the pause you begin realizing the craving itself is creating suffering, not the absence of validation, the craving. A thirsty mind cannot rest peacefully while constantly demanding confirmation. This understanding changes how you relate to yourself. Instead of asking, "How do I get everyone to approve of me?" you begin asking, "Why does my peace depend so heavily on approval in the first place?" That question leads inward toward healing. Many people discover that beneath validation, addiction is deep fear of rejection. Beneath rejection, fear is fear of unworthiness. Beneath unworthiness is often old emotional pain that was never fully seen. Maybe they were ignored emotionally as children. Maybe affection felt conditional. Maybe criticism was constant. Maybe they learned they had to become impressive to feel visible. These wounds create hunger, and hungry people search desperately for confirmation. But Buddhism teaches that external feeding cannot permanently satisfy inner emptiness. The emptiness itself must be understood. This does not mean the self is broken forever. It means awareness must reconnect with something deeper than approval, something quieter, something not constantly changing, presence itself. The present moment does not ask whether everyone approves of you before allowing you to breathe. Existence itself does not require applause. The sky does not need admiration to remain beautiful. Trees do not need validation to grow. The ocean does not ask permission to move. Only the ego believes existence requires constant external confirmation. This realization can feel both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because the ego fears losing approval. Liberating because you finally stop building your entire identity around unstable reflections. Many validation-seeking people secretly live in constant emotional anticipation. They wait for messages, wait for compliments, wait for reassurance, wait for recognition, wait for proof that they matter. This waiting steals presence from life itself. The mind becomes externally focused constantly. What do they think? How do I appear? Did I say enough? Did I do enough? Am I accepted? Awareness gently redirects attention back toward direct experience. This breath, this moment, this feeling, this life already unfolding now. Not after approval arrives. Now. One reason validation destroys inner peace is because it trains the nervous system to outsource emotional stability. The person no longer trusts their own perception of themselves. They need others to constantly confirm reality for them. If praised, they feel valuable. If criticized, they feel worthless. If noticed, they feel important. If ignored, they feel invisible. This creates emotional fragility because the self becomes entirely reactive. Buddhist wisdom creates another possibility. You can appreciate praise without depending on it. You can hear criticism without collapsing into it. You can enjoy connection without losing yourself inside it. You can be loved without turning love into proof of existence. This is emotional freedom, not because you stopped caring about people, but because your inner stability no longer lives entirely inside their reactions. Many people fear this kind of freedom because they mistake it for emotional detachment. But true inner stability actually allows deeper love. When you no longer desperately need people to constantly validate you, relationships become less controlling. You can love more honestly because fear relaxes. You stop performing constantly. You stop manipulating yourself into acceptable shapes. You stop abandoning your truth to maintain approval. Authenticity becomes possible. And authenticity feels peaceful because it removes the exhausting pressure of constant image management. This does not happen overnight. The validation habit may have existed for decades. The nervous system may still seek reassurance automatically for a long time, but awareness changes the relationship with the craving. Instead of blindly obeying it, you begin observing it compassionately. Ah, the mind wants confirmation again. Ah, fear of rejection is rising. Ah, the ego wants reassurance. This gentle awareness weakens attachment slowly. Over time, you begin discovering something surprising. Inner peace grows not when everyone approves of you, but when you stop abandoning yourself whenever approval disappears. That is real stability, not becoming universally admired, not becoming impossible to criticize, not becoming endlessly validated, but remaining connected to yourself even when external reactions shift. This changes everything. Because life will always contain misunderstanding. Some people will not see your heart clearly. Some people will leave. Some people will disagree. Some people will overlook you. If your peace depends on controlling all these things, suffering becomes endless. But awareness teaches another way to live. You can still care deeply, still love deeply, still create, connect, and contribute, but without making every external response the foundation of your worth. This creates spaciousness inside the mind. The nervous system begins relaxing. Silence becomes less threatening. Solitude becomes more peaceful. Rest becomes possible again. You no longer feel emotionally chased by the world every second. And perhaps the deepest transformation happens when you finally realize that the craving for validation was never truly about attention. It was about longing to feel safe within yourself. The ego thought approval would create safety. But real safety begins when awareness no longer collapses every time approval changes. That is why Buddhist wisdom points inward. Not because the world does not matter, but because inner peace cannot survive while chained completely to unstable external conditions. Human opinions will always move like weather. Praise will come and go. Attention will rise and fade. Validation will never remain permanent. But awareness can remain steady beneath all of it. And when that steadiness begins growing inside you, something beautiful happens quietly. You stop begging the world to constantly confirm your existence. You stop measuring your worth through reactions. You stop treating approval like oxygen. You begin breathing from somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter, somewhere free. And in that freedom, you finally discover a kind of peace that applause could never give you, and rejection can no longer fully take away. Tonight, you did not just listen to words. You sat beside the wounded parts of yourself that have been carrying shame, fear, comparison, regret, loneliness, and the quiet belief that you were somehow not enough. But slowly, lesson by lesson, something deeper began to reveal itself. Your worth was never meant to depend on achievement, approval, perfection, attention, or becoming somebody else. The suffering began when the mind forgot its own wholeness and started searching outside itself for permission to feel valuable. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that healing does not happen by fighting yourself harder. It happens when awareness replaces shame, when compassion replaces self-rejection, and when you finally stop abandoning yourself every time pain appears. The broken parts of you were never asking to be hated. They were asking to be understood. And maybe tonight, for the first time in a long time, you can feel that quiet truth returning. You were never too late, never too damaged, never too ordinary, never too far gone to deserve peace. Before you leave, I want you to do something honest. In the comments, write one sentence your younger self desperately needed to hear during their hardest season. It may become the exact words someone else scrolling tonight needs to survive their own pain. And if this journey helped even one wounded part of you breathe a little easier, subscribe to the channel. There are still many more Buddhist lessons waiting to help you return home to yourself.